Hey everyone, it's Tobes, and welcome to your second monitor. Today is the next video in my series of Avatar: The Last Airbender Commander deck techs. The Avatar set has an enormous number of legendary creatures, so I wanted to showcase some of my favorite commander options from among them. I'm releasing a new Avatar Commander deck every Thursday through mid-January when the Lorwyn set drops, in addition to my usual Monday Commander deck tech videos. So if you have a request for a specific Avatar Commander you'd like to see me build, or a way you want to see me build them, let me know in the comments below. As you see, today our commander is Toph, the first Metalbender. Toph is a blind Earthbender who uses her seismic sense to see. She's a prodigy, having learned Earthbending from both human tutors and from badger moles, the original Earthbenders. And as her epithet suggests, she's the first person to figure out how to use Earthbending on metal. I really like the way Wizards has chosen to represent Toph's abilities with this card, since unique effects like this can lead to really fun and interesting deck building choices. I'm excited to show you what I put together for Toph, but before we get started, let's go over my deck building template. I like to build my decks around my commander. I want to show off why they're cool and why I put them in the command zone. So whatever they ask of me, I'm putting 30 cards toward doing that. What our game plan is what we try to do at the table and how we try to win. 30 more cards go towards supporting that game plan in the form of card advantage, acceleration, and interaction. We usually run 1 or 2 sweepers, sometimes more if it would help our game plan, sometimes none at all, but we almost always, especially for decks like this one, keep to our floor of 38 lands, so we make sure we always hit our land drops and we can cast our spells. So let's talk about our commander. Toph, the first Metalbender, is a 3/3 legendary human warrior ally for 1, a red, a green, and a white, so 1 and Naya mana. Toph has 2 abilities. The first is non-token artifacts you control are lands in addition to their other types. So it doesn't give them the innate ability to tap for mana the way that being a basic land does, but they do gain an additional card type, which is land, which is pretty great. And at the beginning of your end step, Earthbend 2. Earthbending is a new mechanic for the set, of course. That means a target land you control becomes a 0/0 creature with haste that is still a land, and you put, in this case, 2 +1/+1 counters on it. And whenever an Earthbended land dies or is exiled, return it to the battlefield tapped. So I recently had a conversation about why the Earthbending mechanic is so cool. A lot of players shy away from turning their lands into creatures, even temporarily, as it leaves those lands vulnerable to removal spells or, just dying in combat. Resource denial is never fun, and even though it's losing just 1 card, it feels like getting 2 for 1. But representing Earthbending by animating lands had to have been too flavorful for the set designers to pass up. So they decided to make Earthbended, or Earthbent, lands return to the battlefield tapped once they're destroyed or exiled. This is an awesome piece of design, giving built-in scam effects to counteract the potential feel-bad of losing a land. And honestly, that's the best part of Earthbending. Not that you can make your lands attack and block like creatures, but that they suddenly have a way to bring themselves back to the battlefield if they leave it. It's the solution to the problem, but it's even more appealing than the benefit that caused the problem in the first place. Immediately, players saw this and started asking, what can I do with this? That is Toph's mentality, exactly. She's a young blind girl, born into privilege and treated with a fragility she does not possess. She's constantly underestimated, minimized, and sold short. And every time, she gets one over on the ones who didn't give her the respect she deserves. Rather than attack their attitudes or turn their scorn against them, she lets people have their preconceptions, then disabuses them with unexpected strength when they least expect it. It's the neutral Jing at the heart of Earthbending. Our commander doubles down on this. Her first ability is an elegant statement of what sets Toph apart from everyone else in the world of Avatar. The rules are not the same for her. She can bend artifacts just as easily as she can bend lands because to her, and no one else, they're one and the same. She isn't flashy about this difference because she doesn't need to be. Everyone else can think what they like. She knows who she is. When Toph joins the gang, stubbornness and abrasion on her part cause conflict at first. But once they all learn each other's value, she's rightly esteemed, not just for what she can do, but for who she is. The context of friendship makes her comfortable enough to joke about her blindness, and to leave behind her connection to the earth, and therefore her seismic sense, to fly around the world. It's no coincidence that only once she has people who can see her for who she really is, Can she develop her earthbending talent to the point that she can bend metal? She might have been trapped and isolated when she made that innovation, but because she knew she had her friends, she wasn't alone. That's how this deck works. It rewards us for playing our 38 lands, but we're running that same number of artifacts to signify how Toph treats them interchangeably. A lot of those artifacts are manaliths, 3-drop rocks that tap for mana, just like lands. But many more are even bigger, artifacts that cost at least as much as Toph herself. Our commander does not care how heavy the metal is. It'll bend to her will, and to ours, just the same. This feels like a combo deck, but we're not actively looking for specific pieces to go off. Instead, we wait and we watch, amassing lands and artifacts and tokens and synergies, surrounding ourselves with friendly faces. We know that everything will fit together when we're finally ready to take decisive action. Our Jing is neutral, our footwork is precise, our plays are deliberate, and our opponents will not see us coming. We don't need to seem like a threat. We know who we are. When we win, it will be out of nowhere, in our own time, on our own terms. And if anyone gets in our way, they can do to themselves exactly what we do to our lands and artifacts alike: get bent. You'll enjoy this deck if you like building interactions in which you get to decide how the puzzle pieces fit together, or if you like the slow burn of a fuse before the explosives detonate and the mountain comes down. So, as usual, this Moxfield list that we're going to be going over today is in the video's description. At the bottom of that list, you will see a considering section, a whole bunch of cards I considered putting in the deck, and I ultimately decided not to, but it's a great place for you to start if you have a bigger budget or a smaller budget, if you want to focus in a different way than I did, or if in any other way you want to build your own Toph the First Metalbender deck. So let's get started with the most exciting part of our game plan. It's our heavy metal cards. These are artifacts that cost at least 4 mana. So they're worth at least the same mana value as Toph, and they're bigger than manaliths. That's just where I set the cutoff for. We've got 20 cards for this, but this isn't our entire game plan. So we're going to start with a classic. It's Panharmonicon. This is a 4-drop artifact that says if an artifact or creature entering the battlefield causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, that ability triggers an additional time. We're doubling up on our triggers here. That means if we have a meteor golem enter the battlefield, that is an artifact and a creature that enters and has a triggered ability based on when it enters, so that will trigger a second time. But if we had a landfall trigger as well, and Toph is in play, that landfall trigger will trigger twice too, even if the landfall trigger is on an enchantment. Because all we care about is that the triggered ability is on a permanent we control, and that it's triggered by an artifact or a creature entering. So this will trigger, or this will double all of our landfall triggers for the artifacts that we have coming in and that count as lands as well, thanks to Toph. So Panharmonicon does an awful lot of work in this deck, even if we haven't built it specifically for enters triggers. Next up, we have Seer's Sundial, another 4-drop artifact that has a landfall trigger. Whenever a land we control enters, we may pay 2, and if we do, we draw a card. It's that simple. It's a way for us to get card advantage out of our landfall. This will trigger on all of our lands, but it will also trigger, while Toph's in play, on our artifacts, which is usually the way we're going to be getting this. Every time we've got extra mana, we're probably spending it for card advantage through the Sundial, and we've got an awful lot of extra mana in this deck. Next is one of the ways we get that extra mana. It's the Sad Robot. Solemn Simulacrum is a 4-drop artifact creature golem that is power and toughness 2/2. When it enters, we get to Rampant Growth. We search our library for a basic, we put it on the battlefield tapped, and we shuffle. And then when it dies, we can draw a card. This is the first example of a great card for us to Earthbend with Toph at the end step. Because remember, we can only Earthbend lands, but Toph makes all of our artifacts lands as well. So if we Earthbend the Sad Robot, it will become a 0/0 with 2/1/1 counters on it. So it stays a 2/2 ultimately. And then if it dies, or if we sacrifice it somehow, or if it gets exiled, however else it might die or go to exile, it will re-enter the battlefield tapped. Which means if it died, we will draw a card. and then it will come back into play tapped, which means we will Rampant Growth again. This is a really good example of the way that we use Toph's ability to treat our artifacts as lands and her Earthbending ability on those artifacts as a way to get repeated and powerful value. And if we were to do that with the Solemn Simulacrum while Panharmonicon is in play, well, the Sad Robot comes in and a creature has entered the battlefield, which triggers its own ability, so we would Rampant Growth twice. Then when it leaves and comes back thanks to Earthbending, it's going to trigger twice again. Next is Survey Mechan. This is a really cool one from Edge of Eternities. A 1/3 artifact creature robot for 4 generic mana. It has flying and hexproof, so it's a 1/3 flyer with hexproof for 4, little overcosted, but it has this ability. For 10 generic mana and sacrifice it, it deals 3 damage to any target, target player draws 3 cards, and gains 3 life. And this ability costs X less to activate, where X is the number of differently named lands you control. Remember, with Toph out, all of our artifacts that aren't tokens are also lands. So this is pretty trivial to get after we've gone through several different turns. We've got a bunch of basics in this deck, but a lot of other non-basics as well, so our land base even contributes to this. And if we were to Earthbend this card, it would still have flying and hexproof, but it would become a 0/0 with 2 counters on it. So it's a 2/2 flying hexproof, which is pretty good too. If we can reduce this 10 to 0, all it costs is sacrificing it for us to get this, which is 3 damage to any target, and we gain 3 life, which is Lightning Helix. Lightning Helix is fine, even in Commander. It's a removal spell, if you want to look at it that way, for something with toughness of 3 or less. Or we can hit a Planeswalker, or we can hit an opponent if we want to. But it's Lightning Helix with Ancestral Recall, and this is a huge, huge benefit, especially because if we Earthbend the Mechan, and we're able to just sacrifice it like immediately or whenever we want to, that's a free drawing 3 cards whenever we need. Pretty sweet. Next is Thran Temporal Gateway. I went back and forth on putting this in the deck, but I just want to show you our curve real quick. Our curve is ridiculous. We've got a pretty nice curve here from 1 to 5, and then a whole bunch of other garbage up here. There's so much stuff. But the Gateway is really great in our deck because we have so many things that cost more than 4 mana. So the way this works, this is a legendary artifact for 4. It says if we pay 4 generic mana and tap it, we can put a historic permanent from our hand onto the battlefield. Historic permanents are artifacts, things that are legendary, and sagas. We have a bunch of those in the deck, but particularly we have at least 38 artifacts in the deck. We have 1 6-drop saga, we have a few legendaries, I don't know if any of them are more than 4, I think one of them maybe? Anyway, an awful lot of cards can get ramped out with this, if you want to think of it as ramp. You're having to pay 4 mana and tap the Gateway, which doesn't tap for anything else on its own, and we just get to power things out faster than we otherwise would. And we have some pretty expensive cards in this deck, so the Gateway can do other things thanks to some of the other cards that we'll see in a later section, but on its own, it's meant to put a lot of our heavy metal into play, as well as some of our other cards as well. Next we have Trading Post. I was really excited to put this in the deck. Trading Post is a great artifact. I have here featured the Lord of the Rings printing, but there's plenty of other printings of it. For 4 generic mana, we get an artifact that says pay 1 and tap and do something else to get a benefit. If that do something else is discarding a card, you gain 4 life. We're not doing that often, but we might. If we're paying 1 life, we're also making an 0/1 goat creature token. I mean, maybe we need a chump blocker, and it's worth paying a life to stop them from, I don't know, attacking with their 12/12 that somehow doesn't have trample. Seems fine. If we pay 1 tap and sack a creature, we can return target artifact from our graveyard to our hand. That's pretty great. We've got a lot of ways for our artifacts to recur themselves in this deck, particularly with Earthbending, but if we happen to lose one of our artifacts, if it gets destroyed, we'd love to get it back, and we can usually get a creature to sacrifice in the process. We have plenty of token creatures for that, maybe even this goat. Or, the best one, pay 1, tap and sacrifice an artifact to draw a card, because we have a lot of token artifacts. Now, those aren't lands because Toph only makes our non-token artifacts into lands. So, you know, would you sacrifice 2 treasures to draw a card? I sure would. So sacrifice 1 to pay for this, tap and sacrifice the other one to draw a card. Yeah, sounds good. So Trading Post has got a lot of good utility for us, and it's so cheap. Really nice. Next is Alabu, Ancient Witness. Great card. 3, a red and a white for a 4/5 legendary artifact creature golem that says other artifact creatures you control have haste. So not super relevant for our non-artifact creatures, or rather our cards that aren't natively artifact creatures. Because if we're earthbending onto one of our artifacts, we're probably doing that using Toph, which means it's happening at the end step, so it doesn't matter that they have haste. But there are some other ways to earthbend in this deck, and we've got plenty of other artifact creatures, so pretty good stuff with Alabu with this first ability. But the second ability is what we're really here for, which is whenever one or more artifact creatures we control attack, Alabu deals X damage to any target, and we scry X, where X is the number of tapped artifacts we control. So this is a little weird to parse, but let's just make it clear. Alabu does not have to be the one attacking. As long as we have one creature that is an artifact as well that is attacking, Alabu is going to do damage to any target, which might be a removal spell, and we're going to get to scry, and those amounts are based on the number of tapped artifacts we control. Not the number of artifact creatures that are attacking, just any number of artifacts we have that are tapped. So we can really ramp this up in a lot of great ways, especially if we've used a bunch of our mana producing artifacts to cast spells ahead of time for this. So yeah, we can turn our tapped artifacts into straight up damage and also into scry, which is excellent for us. Next, from the same deck that Alabu came from originally, is Bronze Guardian. 4 and a white for a star 5 artifact creature golem with double strike. It has ward 2, it gives all of our other artifacts ward 2, and its power is equal to the number of artifacts we control. So it's a big /5 double striker with ward that protects all of our other artifacts. This is terrific. It's just a great thing, especially if we're able to attack with this while Alabu's out. Next is Chocobo Racetrack. This is Zendikar's Royal, but as an artifact, but also a little bit better because it makes chocobos. From the Final Fantasy set, of course. This is 3 and double green for an artifact with a landfall trigger. Whenever a land we control enters, we make a 2/2 green bird creature token with, whenever a land we control enters, this token gets +1/+0 until end of turn. So it gets sort of, it's a 2/2 bird with sort of landfall fire breathing in a way. So we just amass these birds and they get bigger as we play more and more lands and artifacts while Toph is out. And this is an artifact in itself. So worth recognizing, permanents see themselves enter, obviously, otherwise they wouldn't be able to have their enters triggers go off. So Chocobo Racetrack sees itself enter, and if Toph is in play, it sees itself enter as a land, which means its own landfall trigger will trigger by it entering itself. So we cast this, when it enters, it will trigger itself and make a chocobo, this 2/2 bird with the landfall trigger on it. So worth recognizing, you don't have to wait until this is on the battlefield for it to start getting its triggers. It will trigger on itself, assuming Toph is in play. Next up is Bootlegger Stash. I love this card from Streets of New Capenna. Crazy mythic. It's 5 and a green for an artifact that gives our lands an ability. All of our lands can tap to make a treasure rather than mana or whatever else they might have been doing, which means all of our non-token artifacts can tap to make a treasure, which means Bootlegger Stash can come in and immediately be tapped to make a treasure, so we get sort of a 1 mana rebate that gets to stick around. And we can use things like Chocobo Racetrack, which does not have a tap ability on its own. Now it has a tap ability. It can just make treasures for us. Seer Sundial, Panharmonicon, the Sad Robot. You know, these creatures that we need to tap because we want Alabu to do a lot more damage when we attack with just the Bronze Guardian, let's say. We can tap all of these without having to pay anything into them. And we can make treasures for that. Bootlegger Stash is one of the cards that I call Landthems. It's anthems that cards that give all of our lands a special ability. Bootlegger Stash is a great way for us to use our artifacts that are also lands with Toph out to do something more than just what's printed on them. Not to mention, of course, it enables Alibu because it lets us tap our artifacts, our lands that are artifacts. Next up is Contagion Engine. I'm using the breaking news printing of it, even though it's not maybe my favorite printing, just because it's very inexpensive compared to some of the other printings that we could go for. I guess we could go for the Scars printing, and it's only $1 more, but still. Anyway, for 6 generic mana, we get an artifact that when it enters, we put a -1/-1 counter on each creature target player controls. So it's not every opponent's creatures, but we get to pick one opponent and all of their creatures get a -1/-1 counter on them. Which means that anything with a toughness of 1 dies immediately. And Contagion Engine lets us pay 4 into it and tap it, and we can proliferate twice. Proliferate is something we do a little bit in this deck, because we care about our counters, particularly, or usually, the +1/+1 counters that Toph is putting on our artifacts whenever she Earthbends, or on our lands as well. Oftentimes we're getting rid of those because we're sacrificing or otherwise having our artifacts leave the battlefield and then come back thanks to Earthbending, but sometimes we want to just pump things up, and Proliferate's a great way to do it, especially doing it twice. So what Proliferate is we choose any number of permanents in play, not just our own, and or players, not just us. And then any counters that are already on those permanents and players that we've chosen, that permanent or player, each permanent or player we've chosen gets one more counter of every type that's on it. So for example, one of our opponents, when the Contagion Engine came in, got to put a -1/-1 counter on each of their creatures. If any of those creatures survived, when we activate the Contagion Engine, we can choose those creatures, and they'll get 2 more counters, 2 more -1/-1 counters on each of those creatures, which maybe kills a lot more of their creatures. So this is a slow, other than, X1 creatures, Wrath for one player's creatures. And we can just keep proliferating and proliferating and proliferating. It's also the case that if we don't have any stun counters in our deck, but if one of our opponents does, and they put a stun counter on a different opponent's creatures, we can proliferate those counters as well. Any counters at all, not just the ones that we've put on. So Proliferate is a pretty sweet mechanic, and Contagion Engine is a great way for us to get it to work. Next we have Radiant Lotus, which I'm just thrilled. This is such a cool card, and it's so inexpensive. 6 generic mana, or it's inexpensive currency-wise, 6 generic mana for an artifact that says tap and sacrifice 1 or more artifacts. Then you choose a color, target player adds 3 mana of the chosen color for each artifact sacrificed this way. I wish you could choose a color for each artifact you sacrifice, but it essentially makes, by tapping it, we sacrifice any number of artifacts that we want, and they were all Black Lotuses. They all make the same color, because the Radiant Lotus has us choose a color, but we make a huge amount of mana in this deck, especially if we're sacrificing our token artifacts. Imagine sacrificing a treasure and getting 3 mana out of it. Imagine sacrificing 8 treasures and getting 24 mana. I've done it a lot with this deck. It's just a great time. So yeah, Radiant Lotus is an excellent way for us to not just make a lot of mana, but also be a sacrifice outlet for our artifacts which have been earthbent, so that we want them to leave the battlefield and then come right back. That's a good way for us to do it, and get mana in the process. Next we have Wormcoil Engine, another great classic. This is a 6 generic mana, 6/6 artifact creature Phyrexian Worm with Death Touch and Lifelink. And when it dies, it leaves behind a 3/3 colorless Phyrexian Worm artifact creature token with Death Touch, and the exact same thing again, but with lifelink instead. So basically, it's a 6/6 with Death Touch and lifelink, and when it dies, it splits in half. This is a good moment to talk about what happens when you Earthbend something that already has a power and toughness. So Earthbending sets the characteristic of power and toughness at a specific number, which is specifically 0/0. So if we Earthbend the Wormcoil Engine with Toph's End Step trigger, it's going to become a 0/0 Worm Coil Engine with 2 counters on it. So it'll be a 2/2 Death Touch lifelink. When it dies, it's still going to make a 3/3 with Death Touch and a 3/3 with lifelink, and it's still going to come back as a 6/6 with no counters on it. But until then, once we've Earthbent it, it is a 2/2, where it's really a 0/0 with 2 counters, so a 2/2. So we want to keep that in mind. It's not like we get to just put 2 counters on something and treat it like it has the same power and toughness it was printed with. Earthbending overwrites that. We'll talk more about that as we go along. Next is Angel of the Ruins. Angel of the Ruins is 5 and double white for a 5/7 Angel artifact creature. It has flying, and when it enters, we exile up to 2 artifacts and or enchantments. We can just better than disenchant twice when this angel comes in. But it also has Plane Cycling for 2 generic mana, which means while it's in our hand, we can pay 2 generic and discard it to search our library for a Plains, reveal it, put it in our hand, and shuffle. This is a great reason to be running some non-basics that have dual types. I don't believe I put any in this deck, but we have plenty of basic planes that we can go find with this. And if you want to be the kind of person that runs dual-typed non-basics, maybe you have a bigger budget, or you want to run some bicycle lands, something like that, maybe the Tango lands, Angel of the Ruins is a great way to tutor for a land that taps for more than just white. But even still, getting just a basic plains is pretty good in this deck. Next is Combat Thresher. I really like this card. I think it's not as good as I think it is, but I really do enjoy it. Combat Thresher is a 7 generic mana artifact creature construct. It's a 3/3, it has double strike, and when it comes in, we draw a card. That's all pretty good, but it also has this special other striation, it's called, of the text box that has the prototype ability, which means instead of casting it for 7, we can cast it for 2 and a white, and it will come in as a 1/1 rather than a 3/3, but it still has double strike and still enters and draws us a card. So the Combat Thresher is great in this deck because even though it says it's 7 mana, we want to cast it for 3, for 2 and a white. It'll come in as a 1/1 double strike that draws us a card. We can then Earthbend it, and it becomes a 0/0 with 2 counters on it, which is to say a 2/2 with double strike. And then if it dies, it will come back tapped. And because it will come back tapped as its default form, it will come back as a 3/3 double strike that also draws us a card. So if we were to Earthbend it again, it would go from being a 3/3 to a 0/0 with 2 counters on it, so a 2/2. But yeah, we can sort of cheat our way into Combat Thresher being stronger by playing it as its prototype version and then Earthbending it. So it goes from a 1/1 double strike to a 2/2 double strike, and then when it dies, we get it back as a 3/3 double strike. And of course, every time it enters, it draws us a card. Really, really fun. Next, of course, we already talked about Meteor Golem. It's a 7 generic mana artifact creature golem. It's a 3/3, and when it enters, we destroy target non-land permanent and opponent controls. Just a good, repeatable way of us removing something that's threatening to us on someone else's board, and repeatable in the sense that we can Earthbend it and then just let it die somehow, or sacrifice it ourselves, maybe to Radiant Lotus, and it comes back and we'll destroy something else. Being a 3/3 for 7, not very strong on its own, so I don't really mind turning this into a 2/2 with Toph. I know you're thinking, but we just saw a 3/3 for 7 that you were talking about so happily. Well, that's because it also draws us a card and has double strike. But Meteor Golem does a nice job in this deck, and is just a classic way to remove things in an artifacts deck. Another classic artifact is Platinum Angel. 7 generic mana for a 4/4 artifact creature angel with flying that says you can't lose the game and your opponents can't win the game. This is just fun. It's just fun. You know, if our opponents reduce us to 0 life or below, we don't lose the game because we can't lose the game. If somebody gets off their Approach of the Second Sun win, they can't win the game because our opponents can't win the game. All they have to do is kill the Platinum Angel and this goes away, but until they do, the Platinum Angel is helping us out. It is worth recognizing that if we Earthbend the Platinum Angel, it will become, a 0/0 with 2 counters, so it's a 2/2. It will retain flying and this ability. It keeps its abilities. But if we are down to, let's say, 0 life somehow, and the Platinum Angel is keeping us alive, and someone kills our Platinum Angel, the Earthbend trigger, the delayed trigger, will go on the stack to bring the Platinum Angel back, and when it's on the stack, we die, because the Platinum Angel is no longer in play, state-based actions are checked, and we have less than 1 life. So Platinum Angel Earthbend is not going to keep us alive forever, because it's not like it comes back and ignores the stack. Just worth recognizing. Spine of Ishza. I have mixed feelings about this card because it is a good card, but also I had a friend recur this over and over and over against me and just destroy my stuff. I just like dumpstered me so hard. So not great memories of this card, but it is good. So for 7 generic mana, we get an artifact that says when it enters, destroy target permanent. This is better than the Meteor Golem because it does not say target non-land permanent. I don't normally like to put targeted land destruction in my decks other than in my land base with Demolition Field. But Spine of Ishsaw can blow up lands if we really need to. Normally, however, unless someone's running something like a Glacial Chasm or a Rogue's Passage in their terrifying, Voltron deck, we're not going to be going for lands. So Spine of Ishsaw blows something up, and that's all it does. But when it is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, we return it to our hand instead. Or not instead, but we have a trigger that puts it back in our hand. What's nice about this is a triggered ability for when the Spine of Ishsaw dies. If we have Earthbent the Spine of Ishsaw, and it's become a 2/2 creature thanks to Toph, we can just let it die, and it will have 2 triggers go on the stack. One from Earthbending that will bring it back tapped to the battlefield, and one from the spine itself that returns it to our hand. Which one wins? Well, because they're both happening at the same time and we control both triggers, we get to order them however we like. So probably we're going to let Earthbend bring the spine back into play, no longer as a creature, tapped, and it will get its interest trigger again. But if we have a reason we don't want that to happen, we can let this happen first, and it will just go back to our hand from the graveyard. It's worth recognizing that it won't do both. It's not like if we let Earthbend put it back into play, it will then be able to bounce. It will then bounce to our hand because it is a card that has changed zones, so it is a different game object. This ability will not be able to find the Spine of Ishsaw in the graveyard if it's already back on the battlefield, so it just fizzles. Doesn't do anything. So yeah, Earthbend with this is very nice as, again, repeatable way to do some damage to our opponent's game plan by, blowing up their permanents. Next up is Maelstrom Colossus. I'm not a huge fan of Maelstrom Colossus as a card because it's just a 7/7 artifact creature golem for 8. No other abilities other than Cascade, which we'll talk about in a moment. But it is important in this deck because it's an 8-drop, and we care about being able to Birthing Pod our way up above 8. And this is a good card for it. So let's talk about Cascade. When we cast Maelstrom Colossus, because this only happens when we cast it, not when we Earthbend it and have it come back to the battlefield. We get to exile cards from the top of our library until we exile a non-land card that costs less than 8, and we can cast that card without paying its mana cost. All the other cards that we exiled go on the bottom of our library in a random order. So we just flip cards from the top of our library until we hit a spell that doesn't cost 8 or more, and we get to cast that for free, and then Maelstrom Colossus resolves, and it's a 7/7 creature. That's okay. Just a 7/7 creature. We can Earthbend it if we want, which will make it a 2/2 creature, and then it will come back when it dies, tapped, and it won't do anything. It'll just be a 7/7 creature that's tapped, because Cascade triggers when cast, not when it enters. So, worth remembering, Cascade isn't an interest trigger. That would be Discover. So yeah. Next up is Bygone Colossus. Bygone Colossus has a really cool trick with it in this deck. It is similar to Maelstrom Colossus in that it's just an expensive artifact creature. It's a robot giant with big stats. It's just a 9/9. However, this has Warp 3. Warp is an Edge of Eternity's mechanic that says we can cast it for 9 and get a 9/9, or we can warp it in and cast it for 3, which means it will come in, it will just be a 9/9, and it still has Summoning Sickness. It's just a 9/9 on the battlefield. But then at the end step, we exile it, and we can cast it on a later turn from exile for its regular cost. It's sort of like the way you can cast an adventure spell, and once it's done resolving, you can, from exile, cast the creature that the adventure spell is on. Creature or, whatever else that card may be. The only restriction that Warp has that Adventure does not is that you have to do it on a later turn. You can't do it the same turn. But the reason this is interesting is because we can Warp in Bygone Colossus. It's a 9/9. We can then Earthbend Bygone Colossus at the end step, because we get to the end step and we have 2 triggers, assuming Toph is in play as well. The first is the delayed trigger from Warp, which makes Bygone Colossus go to exile, but the other is Toph's Earthbend ability. We can put those on the stack so that Toph's ability resolves first, targeting the Bygone Colossus. So the Colossus becomes a 0/0 with 2 counters on it, and then Warp, that's the Earthbend ability resolved, then the Warp ability resolves, and it sends the Colossus to exile. But at that point, we saw a land, because the Colossus is a land since it's an artifact, go to exile. It was a land that was Earthbent, so Earthbend will bring it back into play tapped. So we paid 3 mana to Warp it in. We get to the end step, we Earthbend it, we have that resolve before the Warp delayed trigger resolves, and once the Warp's delayed trigger resolves, Earthbend will bring it back. And now it's a 9/9 that we have tapped that we only paid 3 mana for. Pretty fun trick. That covers our heavy metal. That's all the big artifacts that we're running in this deck. The next thing we're going to look at is Landfall, which happens to be right here next. So let's talk about Springheart Nantuko. Love this card. Did very well for me at the Modern Horizons 3 pre-release. This is a 1/1 enchantment creature insect monk for 1 and a green. It also has Bestow for 1 and a green. Bestow is important, and I guess I'll explain it first. So the way Bestow works is this. We can cast this creature normally for 1 and a green, and it becomes a 1/1 enchantment creature insect monk. It just comes in, and we've got a 1/1 monk. Or we can bestow it. It's a different casting cost, an alternate. If we do, on the stack, it is an aura, not a creature. It's an aura, of course, targeting one of the creatures that we have, one of the creatures that we want to target. And it will enter, enchanting that creature. When it does, enchanted creature gets +1/+1. That's all it gives the creature innately. However, the Nantuko, whether it is a creature or an aura, has a landfall ability, which is whenever a land we control enters, we may pay 1 and a green if the Nantuko is attached to a creature we control. So basically, we don't get to pay the 1 and a green unless we bestowed the Nantuko. And then if we do that, we make a copy of the creature that it's enchanting. And if we didn't make a token that way, we make a 1/1 green insect creature token. So a better way to put this is, if this is a creature, landfall, make a 1/1 insect. If this is not a creature and it's an aura, landfall, either pay 1 and a green and make a token copy of the creature it's enchanting, or don't pay the 1 and a green and get an insect. You get an insect either way, unless it's an aura enchanting a creature, and when land comes in, you pay 1 and a green. In that case, you don't get the insect, you just get a token copy of whatever you've put it on. But that might be one of our artifacts that isn't even a creature, because that artifact in play is a land, which means if we went to the end step, we can Earthbend it, and now it is a creature with power enough to 0/0 and 2 counters on it. So then on the next turn, we can bestow Springheart Nantuko onto that artifact, and now it is an enchanted artifact creature land that whenever we have land enter, we can pay the 1 and a green and make a copy of that artifact creature land. When we make that token copy is just an artifact, because that's all the printed card was. And because Toph does not make token artifacts into lands, it won't also be a land. And it doesn't matter that it was a creature when we made a copy, or that the original was a creature. The copy of it will just be a copy of the card, just the printed card. So we'll get a token artifact. But if that artifact is Spine of Ishzah or something, if it's Panharmonicon, there's a lot of good stuff we can do with that. So yeah, Springheart Nantuko does some great stuff for us. The one thing to remember, obviously, is you probably don't want to bestow this onto a legendary creature, because if you do, if you make a copy of that legendary creature, you're going to have to sacrifice either the copy or the original because of the legend rule. But what happens if you did sacrifice that original? Or if the enchanted creature, the creature we've bestowed the Nantuko onto, what if it dies? The way bestow works, because there's not enough room to write out the reminder text for it, is that if the Springheart Nantuko becomes unattached from a creature, it doesn't just go to the graveyard the way that an aura does, it falls off and now it's a creature itself. So we're not going to be able to re-bestow it unless there's some way for us to get it back into our hand and cast it again with its bestow cost. But at least we don't completely lose it if the creature it's enchanting gets destroyed or removed some other way. So yeah. Next up, we have Earthbender Ascension. This card's great. 2 and a green for an enchantment that says when this enchantment enters, we Earthbend 2. Then we Rampant Growth. We search our library for a basic land, put it on the battlefield tapped, and shuffle. So we can't search our library for a basic, put it on the battlefield tapped, and then Earthbend it, because that's not the order in which this goes. But we put 2 counters on one of our lands, it becomes a 0/0 creature with haste that will, come back. And that can happen with one of our artifacts, the same way we would do with Toph. Toph makes all of our non-token artifacts lands. We can Earthbend those lands with any Earthbend effect, not just the one printed on Toph herself. So this is, for 3 mana, we get to Earthbend 2 and Rampant Growth. And it has a Landfall ability. Whenever a land we control enters, we put a quest counter on Earthbender Ascension. Quest counters don't have an inherent meaning, they're just used by this card. When we do put that quest counter on it, if Earthbender Ascension has 4 or more quest counters on it, we also get to put a +1/+1 counter on target creature we control, and that creature gains trample until end of turn. So essentially, when Earthbender Ascension enters, it's going to find us a land and put it on the battlefield tapped, and trigger itself to put a quest counter on it. From that point on, every time we play a land, it gets another quest counter, and when it gets that new quest counter, if that quest counter is the 4th one, or any subsequent one, it will trigger again and put a +1/+1 counter on one of our creatures, which will also gain trample until end of turn. So pretty nice, a great way for us to not just Earthbend and ramp a little bit, but we get to repeatedly put counters on things and also give them trample, which is great evasion in this deck, over and over and over. Now it does not let us put 1/1 counters on things that aren't creatures. So even though it Earthbends when it comes in, we can't use it to Earthbend again using its Landfall ability. That's not what this does. It just puts counters on creatures. But if we've Earthbent our lands or our artifacts using Toph or in any other way, we can pump those things up bigger if we want to. Or we can put it on any other creature we have, like Toph herself. I really like Earthbender Ascension. Next up is Evolution Sage. 2 and a green for a 3/2 Elf Druid with Landfall. Whenever a land you control enters, proliferate. So we've already talked about how great proliferate is. We've seen Earthbender Ascension put counters on things. Evolution Sage can make those counters, well, proliferate. You can get more and more of them. So just a nice way for us to continually get more counters and to do that every time we have our lands enter, or if Toph's in play, have our artifacts enter. Next up, a Scourge of the standard format, it's Scoot Swarm. 2 and a green for a 1/1 insect with Landfall. Whenever a land we control enters, we make a 1/1 green insect. But if we control 6 or more lands, meaning if that land came in and it was the 6th land we control, or if Toph's in play, it was the 6th card that is either a land or an artifact, then instead we create a token that's a copy of the Scoot Swarm. So the normal play pattern for this, if Toph's not in play, is Scoot Swarm comes out, we play another land the next turn, get another 1/1 insect. But if that land is the 6th land we have in play, or a subsequent one, instead we make another Scoot Swarm. Then we play another land the next time, both the original and the copy trigger, and now we have 4 Scoots. Then the next time it's 8, and the next time it's 16, and so on and so forth. We can sacrifice these creatures if we want to, but there are always more Scoot bugs. So Scoot Swarm is really great in this deck, especially with all of our artifacts, because it gets us to 6 or more lands so quickly. Toph making all of our artifacts into lands, of course. We can really get out of hand with the Scoots, and I mean, if someone doesn't remove them, we might end up with, I don't know, hundreds of Scoots, which is just, yeah, you've got 30 creatures on the battlefield. I swing with 150 Scoots. Take 120, I guess? Oh no, I lost 20% of my Scoots. Anyway, next turn, swing at the next player. Oh, first play a land to double them all first. So yeah, Scoot Swarm can absolutely get out of hand, which is great because it's removal bait for that reason. Other players will absolutely use a board wipe to try and get rid of the Scoot Swarm, or they will try and remove the Scoot, if they know what's good for them, before we're able to get multiple Scoots in play. Which means they're not using their removal spells on our Earthbended creatures, our artifacts or our lands, and not on our commander either. So they can definitely use it on our commander to shut down the fact that we're getting more Scoots every time we have a non-token artifact enter. But more likely we're going to just say, okay, sorry, we didn't get that. I guess I'll just play this artifact and tap it for mana and ramp it a different way. Play another land. Here's more Scoots. So yeah, this is a really annoying card to play against, and it's an absolute kill on sight, which means they're using up their resources not to kill our other stuff. Next, also from Edge of Eternities, we have Tanic, Memorial Ensign. This is Little Tanic in the deck. 1 a red and a green for a 2/4 legendary Kavu pilot with a landfall trigger. Whenever a land we control enters, Tanic deals 1 damage to each opponent. And if this is the second time this ability has resolved this turn, we also draw a card. So it's not draw a card instead, it's every time we have land come in, Tanic's gonna ping each opponent for 1. The second time that happens each turn, we're gonna draw a card as well. So the third and fourth time, it's just gonna do damage. We only draw the card once each turn, if that. We just have to have lands enter multiple times in order for that to happen. So yeah, Tanic is good repeatable card advantage, but also can do an awful lot of damage to our opponents over the course of the game. Next, Tireless Provisioner absolutely goes bonkers in this deck. 2 and a green for a 3/2 Elf Scout with Landfall. Whenever a land you control enters, create a food token or a treasure token. So usually, we're not making food with this, we're making treasure. We have a lot of big artifacts, and we have a lot of ramp, but Tireless Provisioner is a great repeatable form of ramp, because each of our lands and artifacts, non-token artifacts that is, when Toph is in play, trigger the Provisioner. So we get to have so many treasures that we're able to just essentially turn into like if Toph's in play and the Provisioner's in play, and we're using some treasures to cast an artifact, that artifact's going to enter and give us a rebate of 1 treasure with the Provisioner. If we have Panharmonicon in play, then the Provisioner saw an artifact enter, which will make it trigger twice thanks to Panharmonicon. So we'll get a 2 treasure rebate. Using these treasures with Radiant Lotus makes them make even more mana. They're just terrific. And if we're really hungry for life, we can make food. That's fine. It's okay to do, We just have to remember that this is one of the best ways for us to produce artifact tokens. They do not count as lands because Toph doesn't affect non-token artifacts. Next, we have Obun Muldaya Ancestor. 1 and a Naya, same as Toph, for a 3/3 legendary elf spirit that says at the beginning of combat on your turn, up to 1 target land you control becomes an XX elemental creature with trample and haste until end of turn, where X is Obun's power, it's still a land. And Landfall, whenever a land we control enters, put a 1/1 counter on target creature. So this is pretty sweet. It is, without all the quest counter stuff, it's what Earthbender Ascension does for us once we have 4 or more quest counters on it. Landfall, put a counter on something. That's pretty alright. But I do want to talk about this first ability. We don't have to do anything for this other than just go to combat. Start of combat on our turn, one of our lands, up to 1, doesn't have to be 1, it can be 0, but one of our lands, or artifacts if Toph is in play, becomes an XX elemental with trample and haste until end of turn. This is overriding whatever power and toughness that land already has. So if Toph has Earthbent an artifact and made it a 0/0 with 2 counters on it, this will make it an XX, where X is equal to Obun's power, with 2 counters on it. So it'll go from being, if Obun's still a 3/3, that artifact will go from being it's a land and an artifact. Anyway, it'll go from being a 2/2 to a 5/5, because it goes from a 0/0 with 2 counters to a 3/3 with 2 counters. All of this only lasts until end of turn, but it's worth remembering. And it gives trample. That's pretty good too. So yeah, Obun is a good example of overriding any power and toughness that's already there, or if there wasn't any, there wasn't, and it just becomes that XX. So really nice to remember that the power and toughness do change, but the counters stay there as well, so they affect the new power and toughness. And then of course at the end of turn it will revert to being whatever it was before. So yeah, nice to be able to put counters on Obun himself, or themselves I should say, in order to make bigger and bigger elementals out of these things. So yeah. We've seen Seer's Sundial. It has a landfall trigger that lets us pay 2 to draw a card. We're going to do that. We've seen the Chocobo Racetrack and how it has a landfall trigger, which will trigger itself, since it is itself an artifact, to make a Chocobo, a 2/2 bird with landfall fire breathing. Oh, I guess I mentioned about the fact that it will trigger itself if Toph is in play. The same is true of Seer's Sundial if Toph is in play. It will enter, it is a land entering, so it sees itself enter, so it sees a land entering. So we get to pay 2 and immediately draw a card if we want. Finally, this is an expensive enchantment, but I think it's terrific in this deck. 5 and a green for a 20-cent mythic from Foundations. It's been printed before, but I'm just it's so impactful in Commander. I wish it were played more. Primeval Bounty is whenever you cast a creature spell, make a 3/3 beast creature token. When you cast a non-creature spell, put 3 1/1 counters on a creature you control. And Landfall, whenever a land you control enters, you gain 3 life. So it's got Landfall to gain us life, which is going to happen over and over and over. Every time we play a land, every time we have an artifact enter while Toph is in play, we're going to just keep gaining life. But when we cast that artifact, that was a non-creature spell, assuming it was a non-creature artifact, which means we get to put 3 counters on something. If it was a creature spell, we don't get to put counters on things, but we do get a beast. So Primeval Bounty triggers on everything we do, and if it's an artifact, it's going to trigger twice, because it'll either give us the creature side, because it's an artifact creature, the non-creature side, because it's a non-artifact creature, and then when it enters, with Toph in play, it's going to give us the landfall trigger as well. So Primeval Bounty really goes off. Now it's a 6-mana artifact, but we have an awful lot of ramp in this deck, and we can really use it to spread out our counters, make our creatures really big, protect ourselves by having beasts around, or just give ourselves a life bonus cushion that we don't have to worry about our opponent's attacks from, because we're building up to something even bigger. Really neat. So that covers our landfall cards. That's been 30 cards so far, or 30 cards in 2 different categories. We have a couple more things that play into our game plan, starting with doing some more Earthbending. We've seen one of these already, which is Earthbender Ascension. It lets us Earthbend 2 when it comes in. Our commander lets us Earthbend repeatedly by going to our end step and just Earthbending 2. But we also have Toph, Hard-Headed Teacher. This is 2 a red and a green for a 3/4 legendary human warrior ally. When Toph enters, we may discard a card, and if we do, we return target instant or sorcery from our graveyard to our hand. Well, we're only running 2 sorceries and 5 instants. So that part is not super relevant to our deck, but it's nice to be able to have in case we want to use it. I do want to mention, however, for anyone who's unfamiliar with the way the Magic templates their cards, it says when Toph enters. This ability will only trigger when Toph, Hard-Headed Teacher enters. Even though we are running another card, our commander, that is named Toph, when a Magic card refers to itself by name, you can substitute that word with the words, when this permanent enters, when this card enters. This ability right here is only referring to this card itself, not any other Toph, just to be clear. So, when this Toph enters, if we want to discard a card, we can get one of our instant sorceries from our graveyard back into our hand. Maybe we don't have any in our graveyard, so we don't have to do that. But maybe we want to. We're allowed to. And whenever you cast a spell, any spell, just cast a spell, you get to Earthbend 1. This is unbelievably repeatable. We have, 62 spells in this deck? So 61 other than Toph itself. So while this is in play, 61% of the time, kind of, that's not really how the math works, but a lot of the time, we're going to be Earthbending all over the place. So we can keep Earthbending the same artifact if we want, just continually making it a 0/0 with an additional counter, or we can make more of our artifacts and lands Earthbent. Sounds great. And if the spell we cast is a lesson, we get to put an additional 1/1 counter on the land that we Earthbend, so it would be Earthbend 2 instead. So we are running 7 instants and sorceries, but 2 of those are lessons. So not super likely that this is going to come up, but it's possible. This is more than enough to run this 4 mana 3/4 creature. Being able to continue to Earthbend over and over and over in our deck is so powerful, and to do it when we don't have to wait for the end step with our commander is excellent. Just hard to overstate how useful this is going to be in the deck. Finally, we have our saga that I mentioned, which is so much fun. I love these sagas for the 4 most recent incarnations of Aang. Legend of Kyoshi is just great. This is the avatar that Aang was. This is his past life 2 removed. So before Aang, there was Avatar Roku. Before Avatar Roku, there was Kyoshi. The Kyoshi Warriors and Kyoshi Island are named after her. So this saga, if you haven't seen a saga before, the way this works is this is an enchantment. When it enters, you put a lore counter on it, and you continue to put lore counters on it. You put 1 more lore counter on it at the start of your pre-combat main phase, which is after your draw step. So when it first comes in, you put a counter on it, and it gets its first chapter. Then it gets its second chapter when you get the next lore counter, and then after its last chapter has resolved, you sacrifice it, unless its last chapter has you do something else with it, like this one does. So what does it do? The first chapter is we draw cards equal to the greatest power among creatures you control. Remember, it just has to be a creature. It might be a land and an artifact as well. That's fine. But if we have Toph in play and no other creatures, we're going to draw 3 cards. 3 cards for 6 mana isn't the best rate, but it's fine because we have other things happening. Chapter 2 is we Earthbend X, where X is the number of cards in your hand. A really nice way to make our big hand full of a bunch of creatures that we can't play all at once. Or maybe our hand is so stacked because we've been drawing so many other cards from our card draw spells that we're just full of basic lands in our hand. So we get to Earthbend something for quite a lot. And then that land also becomes an island in addition to its other types. Because, of course, when Kyoshi fought Chen the Conqueror, she separated part of the landmass into Kyoshi Island. And then finally, Chapter 3 is we exile this saga and return it to the battlefield transformed under our control, which means we don't have to sacrifice it at the end. Instead, it will flip over into Avatar Kyoshi. This is a 5/4 legendary creature avatar that says lands you control have trample and hexproof. That means if Toph is out, all of our artifacts do too. And we can tap Kyoshi to add X mana of any one color, where X is the greatest power among creatures we control. So Kyoshi is a great way, another one of these Landthems I was talking about, things that help all of our lands. Every time we've Earthbent one of our lands, those things now have trample and hexproof. Pretty good. And we get to tap Kyoshi for a lot more mana if we want to. Now it is worth remembering, Kyoshi only came in because this saga was exiled and then returned to the battlefield, which means when Kyoshi comes in, this is affecting all of our lands continuously. But this ability has a tap symbol in its cost, which means we can't do it yet because Avatar Kyoshi will have summoning sickness, even though this side of the card was on the battlefield for a couple of turns. It's because it exiled and then returned, so it has just entered the battlefield as a creature. Just worth remembering. That covers all of our Earthbending cards. I just mentioned the Landthems, so let's talk about those. We've seen 2 of them already. Bootlegger Stash makes all of our lands have the tap ability to make a treasure, and Avatar Kyoshi, on the backside of the Legend of Kyoshi, gives all of our lands trample and hexproof. We're also running one of our many manaliths is Chromatic Lantern. 3 generic mana for an artifact that taps for 1 mana of any color. Those are the requirements to be a manalith. That's just what we call it after the card Manalith, which was a 3 mana artifact that taps for 1 mana of any color. But Chromatic Lantern also gives all of our lands the ability to tap for 1 mana of any color. This is terrific because it doesn't just fix our mana with all of our lands, making it so every land we have can tap for whatever color we need. It also makes it so with Toph out, every one of our artifacts now has this ability. So we can tap all of our artifacts for mana. Our non-token artifacts, that is. We can't use, our token artifacts, like our treasures, repeatably for any color of mana. But Chromatic Lantern is so powerful in so many decks for fixing mana. In this deck, incredibly powerful, because we have so many artifacts that even if we don't Earthbend them to make them into creatures, they're giving us good value, but they don't do anything when we tap them. Chromatic Lantern lets us use them as ramp and makes all of our non-token artifacts into manaliths. Finally, we have Blossoming Tortoise. It's a card I've been wanting to put in a deck for a long time, from Wilds of Eldraine. This is a 3/3 turtle for 2 and double green that says when it enters or attacks, we mill 3 cards, and then we get to return a land from our graveyard to the battlefield tapped. So we get a little bit of ramp from that, because assuming that we had a land in our graveyard, either it was already there or we milled it, because it doesn't have to be a land from among the cards we milled, we get to get it in tapped. I do want to make mention, though, that it says we return a land card. If Toph is in play, our non-token artifacts in play are lands in addition to their other types. It doesn't make all of the cards in our deck with the artifact type lands as well. They have to be on the battlefield with Toph in play in order for them to also be lands. So Blossoming Tortoise cannot return artifacts from our graveyard because Toph makes all of our artifacts into lands, because artifacts only exist on the battlefield. Otherwise, they are artifact cards. The same is true of lands and land cards. So just to remember, Blossoming Tortoise can only bring back land cards, not artifacts, even if Toph is in play. However, activated abilities of lands we control cost 1 generic mana less to activate. That is relevant to all of our artifacts in play. So if we have an artifact that lets us draw cards when we have Landfall, Seer's Sundial, let's look at. It says whenever a land we control enters, we can pay 2. If we do, we draw a card. This is a triggered ability. This is not an activated ability. So worth recognizing that that's not going to help us. But I know we have some heavy metal cards that'll help us here. For example, Trading Post. Trading Post has us pay 1, tap, and discard a card, or pay a life, or sack a creature or sack an artifact. But it's always pay 1 and tap, plus something else to get something. Blossoming Tortoise makes that cost 1 generic mana less to activate, which means we don't have to pay the 1 and tap, we just have to tap and pay that additional cost of paying a life or sacking an artifact or whatever we want to do to make the Trading Post go off. Because with Toph in play, that Trading Post is also a land, and all of those activated abilities cost 1 generic less to activate. So the Tortoise is great. A lot of times this sort of ability says minimum 1, but the Tortoise does not, so we can make things much cheaper for ourselves. There's a series of artifacts that this really helps, which we'll see soon. Plus, land creatures we control get +1/+1. At this point, we sort of get to treat any earth-bent creature, because it is a land and a creature, and maybe an artifact, depending on what we've earth-bent. It has a base power and toughness of 0/0, and it has counters on it. With this, it also gets this +1/+1. So it does not have a base power and toughness of 1/1, but we can sort of treat it like it does. So it helps all of our lands and artifacts that have been earthbent, and it helps all of our lands that have activated abilities. Plus, it ramps by milling 3 and letting us put a land into play tapped every time it enters or attacks. So we may not be attacking with this Tortoise, but if we are, we're getting a lot out of it. Very good turret. All right, those are our Lanthems, and that covers basically all of the things that I think of as our game plan. We have a number of categories beyond this to supplement that game plan, but first, let's talk about these categories of support for the game plan, starting with card advantage. As usual, I use the word draw here as a shorthand for card advantage. It doesn't mean all of these cards actually do the game action of drawing us a card. They just give us access to more cards in our hand. Starting with Seismic Sense. Obviously, you got to run this in a Toph deck. A single green for a sorcery, and this is one of our lessons, so maybe relevant for Toph Hard-Headed Teacher. It's a sorcery for 1 that says, look at the top X cards of your library, where X is the number of lands you control. That is an awful lot of lands for us. We might be casting this early on, and maybe it's not so many, but if Toph is in play, if our commander Toph is in play, we're going to have so many lands. We might be looking at 20, 30 cards with this 1 mana spell. And then we can reveal a creature or land from among them, put it in our hand, put the rest on the bottom of our library in a random order. So again, this is a creature or land card. That means we can't reveal an artifact unless that artifact is also a creature or land printed on the card. Even if Toph is in play, Toph doesn't make the artifact cards in our library into lands as well. Only the artifacts we have in play, only the artifact permanents. But this lets us go find one of our creatures, of which we have 24 other than our commander, or we can find a land with it. We have pretty good lands in this deck, all of which, of course, trigger our landfall. So yeah, Seismic Sense lets us get a card into our hand. Even though it isn't drawing it, it's card advantage. Next is Ichor Wellspring. Gross. 2 generic mana for an artifact that says when it enters or is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, we draw a card. So 2 mana draws us a card. If we Earthbend this, it's now a 2/2. We can attack with it, we can block with it, we can sacrifice it. When it dies, it will be put into a graveyard, which means we draw a card. But Earthbend will also put it back onto play tapped, which means it will enter again, it will draw another card. So pretty good way to get additional repeatable card advantage from just this little gross blob. Next is Oswald Fiddlebender, the reason that Maelstrom Colossus is in this deck. Maelstrom Colossus? Is that right? Maelstrom Colossus, yeah, I got there. Good work. So, Oswald Fiddlebender from Adventures in the Forgotten Realms. 1 and a white for a 2/2 legendary gnome artificer. Oswald has the ability Magical Tinkering for a single white and tap and sacrifice an artifact. So this is one of our sacrifice outlets. We can search our library for an artifact card with mana value 1 plus the sacrificed artifact's mana value. Then we get to put that artifact on the battlefield, shuffle, and we can only do this as a sorcery, but it lets us, Birthing Pod is the shorthand for this. It lets us take our Ichor Wellspring, let's say, which is a 2 mana artifact. We pay a white, tap Oswald, and sack the Ichor Wellspring, which of course draws us a card, and find ourselves a 3 mana artifact, like Intelligence Bobblehead. We could do that with Intelligence Bobblehead next turn, and find Seer Sundial, because each of these are 1 mana more than the last. So it has to be exactly 1 more. It doesn't say equal to 1 plus the artifact mana value or less. But we've got the ability to walk our way up. Here we have some 1 mana artifacts all the way up through our 9 mana Bygone Colossus. And of course, Maelstrom Colossus is 8 mana. We've got more that are artifacts below that. So yes, Oswald is going to be able to give us more and more and more that we need. And if we have already Earthbent the artifact that we're sacrificing, we're going to get that artifact back into play tapped, thanks to Earthbending. So we haven't really lost anything, and we've gained something great that cost 1 more than what we lost. What we lost but didn't lose, thanks to Oswald. So just hard to overstate how good this card is in our deck. Next is one of our bobbleheads. If you haven't seen these before, there are 7 of them. They're from the Fallout decks. We're running all 7. I have tagged the bobbleheads all together so you can see them, if you want to just look at them together. I'm not going to go over them all together. I'm going to go over them as we go through them in the next section, which is the acceleration section. But we're going to look at the ones here that also give us card advantage. All the bobbleheads are manaliths. They're 3 mana artifacts that add 1 mana of any color. They have the bobblehead subtype, but they also have a different ability. Intelligence bobblehead, for example, if we pay 5 and tap, we can draw a number of cards equal to the number of bobbleheads we control. So if all we have is this one, it's 5 and tap to draw 1 card, which we've got lots of mana in this library, or in this deck rather. Sometimes that's all we need to do. But usually we want to have more bobbleheads in play so that we can do this over and over and over. It is an excellent thing to do to take Intelligence Bobblehead, Earthbend it into a creature, bestow Springheart Nantuko on it, then use the bobblehead's mana ability when we play another artifact or land to tap for mana, to pay for the Nantuko trigger, to make a copy of the Intelligence Bobblehead, which of course will come in as a token, so it's not a land itself, but it does come in untapped, so that means we can tap it for mana as well. And we can still use this ability with the copy of the bobblehead as well. But now, when we do that, it sees 2 bobbleheads in play, the original and the copy. So we'll get to draw 2 cards. Anyway, just a nice way to get more out of this bobblehead, as well as the other ones. Next, we have Lochiel, Clockwork Scholar. This is a non-artifact creature, but it is 2 and a white for a 2/4 legendary Elephant Artificer from the Lorehold commander deck. Lochiel has 2 abilities. Prevent all combat damage that would be dealt to attacking artifact creatures you control. That's not all of our artifact creatures, just the ones that are attacking. But if we attack with our artifact creatures, whether or not they are artifact creatures because they are printed as such, or because we earthbent them to make them into creatures and also lands and also artifacts, that they're still artifact creatures even though they're also lands. If we attack with them, they can't be dealt combat damage. It's prevented as long as Lochiel is on the battlefield. In addition, whenever 1 or more artifact creatures we control enter, we draw a card, but only once each turn. So it's not that hard for us to get artifact creatures into play. We have an awful lot of them, but most of our artifacts are not creatures. So it's worth recognizing that this will only trigger on artifact creatures. We do have plenty of them that we can draw from, but this is a pretty good ability as well. I do also want to mention, for anyone who's a new player and has not encountered this before, if we have an artifact in play that is not a creature, and then we earthbend it to make it into a creature, it has not entered. It was already on the battlefield. It did not enter. So we don't draw a card just because it became a creature. We didn't have an artifact creature enter. We had an artifact become a creature. Enter means to change zones, going from any other zone to the battlefield. This card has not changed zones, it's changed types. So we will not draw a card from that. Just worth remembering. Next, we have another bobblehead. It's the Perception Bobblehead. Again, 3 for an artifact that's a bobblehead that taps for 1 of any color. But this one lets us pay 3 and tap it to look at the top X cards of our library, where X is the number of bobbleheads we control. We can then cast a spell with mana value 3 or less from among them without paying its mana cost. Then we put the rest on the bottom in a random order. So if all we have out is the Perception Bobblehead, probably not necessarily worth paying for this ability. It's 3 and tap, so since this taps for mana, we're sort of spending 4 mana to look at the top 1 card and hopefully cast it for free if it's mana value 3 or less. We do have an awful lot of cards that are mana value 3 or less, but if we hit something that's 4 or more, we don't get to cast it, and it goes on the bottom. If we hit a land, we can't cast a land, even though lands don't have a mana value more than 3, because you don't cast lands, you only cast spells. So, not ideal. But if we have a few of our bobbleheads in play, it's not bad to be able to get out something, because an awful lot of our cards are mana value 3. So we can get maybe even another bobblehead out, or a different manalith. Pretty good. We've seen this Tannic. Tannic can draw us a card the second time his landfall trigger resolves each turn. Seer Sundial we've seen as well. When we have lands enter, and if Toph's in play, that includes the Sundial, we get a triggered ability that lets us pay 2 to draw a card. Totally worth doing as many times as we can. The Sad Robot does not draw us a card when it enters, but it does when it dies. Survey Mechan, we've seen already, it lets us draw 3 cards, plus Lightning Helix something, when we pay for its ability and sacrifice it, which hopefully we can do multiple times throughout the game thanks to Earthbending. Trading Post can let us pay 1, tap, and sack an artifact to draw a card. Great way for us to, if we've Earthbent the Sad Robot, draw a card off of that as well, and then get it back in Rampant Growth as well. But yeah, Trading Post lets us do that. It also gives us card advantage in the form of Recursion, because we can use its 3rd ability to sack a creature and bring an artifact from our graveyard back to our hand. I put those things in our Recursion section, but it is technically a way of getting card advantage as well. Legend of Kyoshi, of course, Chapter 1, draws us cards equal to the greatest power among creatures we control. Angel of the Ruins, we can Plane Cycle to discard it, and it's not really advantage since we're throwing this away and getting a land into play, or getting a land into our hand, but we do get that land into hand. Combat Thresher lets us draw a card when it enters, and Maelstrom Colossus lets us cast a spell for free, assuming we want to when we exile, once we cascade into it, I should say. Maybe we don't want to, maybe it's Swords to Plowshares and there's nothing we want to hit with it. If that's the case, we don't get to cast it. But yeah, probably going to give us some kind of thing that we want. So that covers all of our card advantage section. Let's look now at our acceleration. We're going to start with Exploration Brood Ship. Oh, I guess I should mention, I tag this as ramp. It's not all necessarily ramp. A lot of it is in this deck, but I just use that as a shorthand for acceleration. So for a single green, we get the Exploration Brood Ship. This is a spacecraft. So spacecraft, if you haven't seen them before, work like this. It is an artifact with a single ability or anything else that's printed up here in this striation, it's called. It also has other striations that we can get to by using the station ability. Station means we can, at sorcery speed, tap another creature we control to put charge counters equal to that creature's power on the spacecraft. Once we do that, it gains further portions of this text box, or really, it doesn't gain them, it sort of activates them, once it has enough charge counters on it. So, from the start, if we get 3 charge counters on it, and remember, our commander Toph has a power of 3, so we can play the Exploration Brood Ship when Toph is already in play, and immediately tap her at sorcery speed to get the Brood Ship's first ability online. And it says, you may play an additional land on each of your turns, which is the spell Exploration. It's terrific for our deck. We don't get to play any of our artifacts for free, because even though they're lands on the battlefield, they're not in our hand. But we can fill up our hand, and we often do, with an awful lot of lands in this deck. Being able to play an extra one every turn, that's just so much acceleration for us, and it triggers all of our landfall as well. In addition, if we continue to station the Exploration Brood Ship, and we get it up to at least 8 counters, it keeps this ability, but it becomes, or not becomes, but it suddenly is a 4/4 flyer that has the ability, once during each of your turns, you may cast a permanent spell from your graveyard by sacrificing a land in addition to paying its other types. So we can sacrifice lands, which, if our commander is in play, also means our non-token artifacts, in order to have permission to cast permanent spells in our graveyard. So we'd be able to cast, let's say the Solemn Simulacrum is in the graveyard. We could cast it again by sacrificing one of our lands, which might be, a different one of our artifacts. We still have to pay its cost when we do that, but we have permission to do so. And if we sacrifice a land that is Earthbending will bring it right back to the battlefield again, either maybe triggering some landfall, but definitely making it so even though it's tapped, we didn't lose it. So something I want to talk about for Exploration Brood Ship, and we've talked about this a little bit already with respect to how Earthbending overwrites power and toughness. There is some confusion about how the station ability grants a power and toughness to spacecraft. It does not suddenly gain this power and toughness. It always has this power and toughness. It's just not accessible to us until until it has 8 charge counters on it. But what if we were to take Exploration Broodship, and no matter how many counters it has on it, what if we were to Earthbend it with our commander's end step ability? It would become a 0/0 creature that's also an artifact, that's also a land, of course, that has 2 +1/+1 counters on it. And its power and toughness are set at 0/0. If we then station it up to 8, it does not become a 4/4. It remains a 0/0. I know that seems confusing, and it is. And there's a reason for it. The reason is layers. We're going to talk about the rules now. Layers are how Magic deals with continuous effects, which are things that continuously affect other cards. Specifically, there's a list of layers that go in a specific order and are applied in that order. And then if multiple layers are applied at the same order, we use what's called, or applied at the same layer, I should say. Multiple effects are applied at the same layer. We use timestamp order, which is to say whichever thing happened most recently is the one that wins. So let's look at the actual rules for this. Within a layer or sublayer, which we are talking about right now, layer 7B, which is effects that set power and toughness to a specific number or value, which is what Earthbending does. Within that layer, determining which order effects are applied is done using a timestamp system. The effect of the earlier timestamp is applied before an effect of the later timestamp. So a continuous effect generated by a static ability has the same timestamp as the object the static ability is on, or the timestamp of the effect that created the ability, whichever is later. So the effect that created the ability is relevant here because that's Earthbending. If our commander triggers at the end step, that's the timestamp at that moment that the Earthbending ability will have for our Exploration Broodship. So the Broodship continuous effect generated by a static ability has the same timestamp as the object the static ability is on. An object receives a timestamp at the time it enters a zone. So this Broodship has a timestamp based on when it entered. Because it enters, obviously, before Toph can Earthbend it, it's always going to have an earlier timestamp than any Earthbend ability that Toph were to use, Or Obun, if we were to make it into an elemental, that's going to have a later timestamp than the Broodship itself. So the Broodship has a timestamp based on when it entered the battlefield. The effect, which is going to be either Obun or, more relevantly, Toph's Earthbending ability or any Earthbend ability, that's generated by the resolution of the spell or ability at the time it resolves. So that's going to be its timestamp. So that's why that wins. I know you're wondering, but doesn't getting it up to 8, isn't that when this ability starts working? And unfortunately, that's not how stationing works. So it's worth seeing here. Earthbend means target land you control becomes a 0/0 land creature with haste in addition to its other types. That's just how Earthbend works. Station, each station symbol, which is what these little kind of gray dots are with a number in them, represents a static ability. Those static abilities, any abilities printed within the same text box as a striation as a station symbol are part of its static ability. The same is true of any power and toughness boxes. So these are static abilities. It already has these abilities. They're already in play. They're already in effect when this card enters, but they're in effect in the sense that this is something that's true about the card as long as it has these counters. That's already in effect here. It's just a question of, does it have the counters? Okay, then you have access to it. This is sort of online, if you will. The abilities say, as long as this permanent has in or more charge counters on it, it has these abilities and is a creature with base power and toughness, which is set in addition to its other types. It already has this ability. this ability is, as long as this thing has 8 counters, it's got flying and this and a power and toughness of 4/4. That ability is already in place, even if it's not quote-unquote online. We're just waiting to see when it's online. But the ability is already in place once this enters the battlefield. So that timestamp on that ability is already true as the moment this enters the battlefield. And then when Earthbending happens, it's going to set that power and toughness to be 0/0, even if we haven't gotten this online yet, because this is the timestamp for this is equal to the timestamp of when this entered the battlefield, and obviously Earthbending is going to happen later, which means Earthbend wins. So a lot of rules to just explain that if something changes the power and toughness of something else in this deck, there are some things that might work differently, but if something changes the power and toughness of something in this deck, and that the thing that's changing it is Earthbending or Obun's ability, just go with whatever's happened most recently. It will work out for you. So anyway, that's a lot about Exploration Broodship. I didn't want to even include this initially because I don't want to make this deck like confusing rules-wise, especially for new players who are coming to Magic for Avatar. Not because new players can't handle it, but because there's a lot going on already, and Commander's a confusing format. So I don't want to put undue stress on someone who's new. But Exploration Broodship is so perfect for this deck. You know, sometimes you got to talk about layers. What can I say? Next up is Soul Ring. You know Soul Ring. It costs 1. It's an artifact that taps for 2. It's the symbol of the format. It's so powerful. Never cut Soul Ring. It's awesome. Next is Arcane Signet. It's another basically auto-include. It's a 2-mana rock, which is to say it's an artifact that taps for mana. It makes mana equal to, well, 1 mana of any color in our commander's color identity. So this is a 2-mana rock that comes in untapped and makes white, red, or green for us. It's very efficient. It's excellent for us. We want this. Next up is Throne of Geth. This is 2 generic mana for an artifact that says tap and sacrifice an artifact to proliferate. This is another great way for us to get more and more and more counters, but also it's a really cheap sacrifice outlet. So if we've earthbent something and we want it to leave the battlefield and or come back, Throne of Geth is a great way for us to do that while also proliferating all of our counters. So yeah. Next up is one of our many manaliths. We're going to go on a stream of this now. I think we have 11 manaliths in this deck, which again are 3-mana artifacts that tap for 1 mana of any color. Etheric Amplifier also has the ability, pay 4, tap, and choose 1, only as a sorcery. Double the number of each kind of counter on target permanent, or the number of each kind of counter you have. We are not really using this in this deck. We're not amassing experience counters, and we sure don't want to do this for when we have poison counters. But yeah, being able to look at one of our Earthbent creatures and say, oh, you're a 0/0 with 2 counters. Etheric Amplifier says now you're a 0/0 with 4 counters. And then we did that last turn, now you got 8 counters. Now you got 16 counters. We can keep doing it if we want. We get to choose one thing, and rather than proliferating and putting an extra counter on everything we want to that already has a counter, we get to put twice the number of counters on something. May not come up that often, but this seems expensive, but we've got an awful lot of ramp in this deck, including from this, for any turn we don't want to use this other ability. Next is a different bobblehead that we've seen already. Agility bobblehead is, again, 3 for an artifact that adds 1 of any color, but we can also pay 3 and tap, and up to X target creatures we control each gain haste until end of turn and can't be blocked this turn, except by creatures with haste, where X is the number of bobbleheads we control as we activate the ability. This means when we activate the ability goes on the stack, and if someone were to respond to the ability by disenchanting or otherwise removing one of our bobbleheads, the number is locked in when we activated it. It doesn't check as it resolves like most normal abilities do. It wouldn't say like, oh, you have 1 fewer bobbleheads, so it's fewer target creatures. This is locked in when we activate it. The reason is because we have to choose target creatures when we activate it. So if it didn't work this way, it would change the number of creatures, and that would be a mess. So yeah, this agility bobblehead ultimately makes our creatures mostly unblockable. except by any creatures with haste. So we just choose our opponent to attack carefully, and we're going to be all right. Next up is Charisma Bobblehead. For 3 generic mana, we get a Bobblehead that taps for 1 of any color, or we can pay 4 and tap it to make a number of 1/1 white soldier creature tokens equal to the number of Bobbleheads we control, but of course only as a sorcery. So a great way to add a whole bunch of tokens to the board if we want some tokens to block or attack or just supplement our gameplay in other ways. We've seen the Chromatic Lantern and how it very powerfully gives all of our lands the ability to tap for mana of any color, including our artifacts while our commander's in play. We've seen Earthbender Ascension and how it rampant growths us. It helps us when it comes in. It goes and finds a basic, puts it on the battlefield, tap for us, and shuffle. Endurance Bobblehead is another bobblehead we haven't seen. Again, 3 for an artifact, taps for 1 of any color. We can pay 3 and tap it as well, and then up to X target creatures we control get +1/+0 and indestructible until end of turn, where X is the number of bobbleheads we control as we activate this ability only as a sorcery. So this protects our creatures and also makes them a little bit stronger in the process. We've seen Intelligence Bobblehead. It lets us draw cards in addition to tapping for mana. We haven't seen Luck Bobblehead yet. For 3, we get a Bobblehead that taps for 1 of any color, but we can also pay 1 and tap it to roll a number of 6-sided dice equal to the number of bobbleheads we control. For each even result, we make a tapped treasure, and if we rolled 6 exactly 7 times, we win the game. So just a free win the game. Now that means we have to roll 7d6, which means we have to have all of our bobbleheads out, or we have made some duplicates, I guess. And we gotta roll a 6 on all of them. We've got to get a super Yahtzee. But if we do, we win the game. Pretty nice. In any case, we can expect that about, on average, half of our dice are gonna make treasures. So for 1 mana and tap, so essentially 2 mana, we're rolling at least 1 die. We might get 1 treasure half the time, but if we have more bobbleheads, we have better chances of getting more treasures. Sometimes we might even get a number of treasures equal to the number of bobbleheads. You know, it's not bad, but it certainly helps our other bobbleheads. For example, our Perception Bobblehead. Again, it's a manalith, but we can also pay 3 and tap it to look at the top. We've already seen the Perception Bobblehead, of course. It's the one that lets us look at the top X and maybe cast something mana value 3 or less from it. Next up is Solar Array. This card is so cool in this deck. For 3 generic mana, we get an artifact that taps for 1 of any color, so it's a manalith. But when we next cast an artifact spell this turn, that spell gains Sunburst. So it doesn't even have to be an artifact that we use this mana on. Sunburst means if that artifact is a creature, for each color of mana we spent to cast it, it comes in with a 1/1 counter. If it wasn't a creature, it comes in with that many charge counters on it. So if we use this to cast Exploration Bobblehead, then that means it's going to come in with 1 counter on it from the start. We know it's 1 because Exploration Bobblehead, we can only spend the 1 mana on it because it only costs 1. But if we were to cast, an artifact creature like Solemn Simulacrum, we can produce 4 mana for it. And if we've got a lot of manaliths that are making all kinds of different colors, we can make a white, a green, a red, and then either a blue or a black. Might as well. And the Solemn Simulacrum will come in having gotten Sunburst with 4 counters on it. It'll be a 6/6. So Solar Array, usually we're only going to be putting, 3 extra counters on, if that. But we can get up to 5 if we're willing to make that kind of mana from our manaliths. It seems neat. I think this is our last bobblehead. Yeah, Strength Bobblehead is a bobblehead. It's a manalith that for 3 and tap, we can put X 1/1 counters on a creature, where X is the number of bobbleheads we control, but only as a sorcery. So another way to put counters on things. Tireless Provisioner, we've also seen. It can make us treasures with Landfall. Blossoming Tortoise, when it enters or attacks, we mill 3, and we can bring a land back to the battlefield from our graveyard tapped. Solemn Simulacrum, of course, Rampant Growths us when it enters. Thran Temporal Gateway, it's like Ramp, being able to put a historic permanent from our hand onto the battlefield. We're only paying 4 and tap this, so if we're putting out something that costs more than 4 or 5, then we're certainly getting a discount. Bootlegger Stash, of course, lets all of our lands tap for treasure, so we can use that to ramp ourselves. We've seen Radiant Lotus and how it lets us tap it and sacrifice any number of artifacts we want, and we get 3 mana per artifact we sacrificed, but just all one color. And of course, Legend of Kyoshi lets us, on the backside, tap for mana. So yeah, that covers our acceleration section. Quite a lot of acceleration in this deck, because we want to do our big artifacts. We want to get those out, and we want to be able to trigger a lot of landfall. We want to be able to just have a lot of artifacts that are in play and coming into play and continuing to let us put more things in play. So a big theme of Manaliths in this deck. Next is our interaction section, which again I've just shorthanded as removal. We're going to start by talking about Dispatch. Dispatch is a single white for an instant that says tap target creature. But if we have Metalcraft, which means if we can control 3 or more artifacts, we also exile that creature. So we do tap it first, but then we exile it if we have Metalcraft, which wait to cast Dispatch when you have Metalcraft, if you're able to. So just very strong to be able to, at instant speed for a single mana, tap and exile a creature. Which is why we're running Path to Exile and Source of Plowshares. Both of these cards do the same thing. They are, or almost the same thing. They both cost 1 white mana, they're both instants, they both exile a target creature, and they both give a kickback to the creature's controller. Source to Plowshares will let that creature's controller gain life equal to the creature's power. Path to Exile will let that creature's controller rampant growth. They search for a basic, put it on the battlefield, tapped, and shuffle. Swords is better than Path, obviously, because we're not giving them anything other than life, and we can easily take that away, or their other opponents can too. But both of these are very strong removal spells, as is Dispatch. So a great trifecta in an artifacts deck that has white. Next, had to keep this card in here because it's Toph. It's the origin of Metalbending for Toph the First from Metalbender. Gotta do it. 1 and a green for one of our lessons. It's an instant that says we can either destroy target artifact or enchantment, so we can naturalize, or we can put a +1/+1 counter on target creature we control, and it gains indestructible until end of turn. So a nice way to protect something and put a counter on it. Or we can just destroy an artifact or enchantment. Pretty good. Emergency Eject. I put this in basically all of my white decks now. I love this card. 2 and a white for an instant that says destroy target non-land permanent. Its controller creates a lander token, which is an artifact that says pay 2, tap and sacrifice it to rampant growth. Search for a basic, put it on the battlefield, tapped and shuffle. I like this because it can't hit lands, but we're not really trying to get rid of people's lands. It can hit anything else though. And then when it does, they don't get anything for it until they pay 2 mana. And then when they do that, they get a tapped land, tapped basic. So I like this better than cards like Stroke of Midnight, which gives them a 1/1 creature token that they could block with, or Generous Gift, which gives them a 3/3 elephant, but it can hit lands, and I don't really need that to happen. So avoiding having a creature that they can interact with, they can gum up the board with, it gives them the ability to, go find a basic, but they've got to pay for it to do it, as opposed to Path, which it does cost 2 less, but they just get the basic on resolution. So yeah, I like Emergency Eject, is my point. Next is Annie Joins Up, which is so good in this deck. 1 and Naya mana, a red, a green, and a white, for a legendary enchantment that says when it enters, it deals 5 damage to target creature or planeswalker an opponent controls. So just straight up 5 damage to something. And if a triggered ability of a legendary creature we control triggers, that ability triggers an additional time. So for example, Toph Hard-Headed Teacher. When we cast a spell, we Earthbend 1. That's a triggered ability. Annie Joins Up, we'll have it trigger twice, so we get to Earthbend 1 twice. Tannic Memorial Ensign will trigger twice when we have landfall. So it'll do 2 damage to each of our opponents, but also since it triggered a second time, we'll draw a card. But most relevantly is our commander. Our commander's final ability, at your end step, Earthbend 2, is a triggered ability. So we're going to get to Earthbend 2 twice every end step of ours while Annie Joins Up is in play. We can put that Earthbend 2 on one of our lands / artifact lands, non-token artifacts that counts as a land because of Toph. And then the second one on the same artifact or land if we want to, just making it, a 0/0 with 4 counters on it. Or we can split them up onto 2 different targets. It's up to us. Any joins up is great in this deck. The Survey Mechan, of course, when we activate its Sacrifice ability, it will Lightning Helix something, so 3 damage to something. That's pretty good. Alibu, when we attack with an artifact creature, Alibu is going to do a bunch of damage based on the number of tapped artifacts we control to any target, so we can point that at a creature or planeswalker for removal. Angel of the Ruins, of course, enters and exiles up to 2 artifacts and enchantments. Meteor Golem can blow up any non-land permanent, and Spine of Ishsaw can blow up any permanent. So, lots of different ways to remove things in this deck. We are also running 2 Wraths. We already talked about Contagion Engine, which comes in and puts a -1/-1 counter on each creature target player controls. So not a full Wrath, and of course it just reduces their power and toughness by 1, which of course kills anything with a toughness of 1. But we can, built into it, proliferate that and continually do this until everything they had that we got to put a counter on is dead. So a very soft Wrath, but it counts. But we also run Hour of Revelation. Hour of Revelation is 3 and double white, or triple white rather, for a sorcery that also costs 3 less to cast if there are 10 or more non-land permanents on the battlefield. So on the battlefield at all, not that we control. This can be just triple white. And when we do, it's destroy all non-land permanents. Everything. If it's not a land, it's gone. That means this will destroy Toph. But when it destroys Toph, Toph is still in play and Toph is in play when this resolves, meaning all of our artifacts are still lands. So they will not be destroyed at the same time Toph is. Toph will just be destroyed herself, and then we can either put her in the graveyard or, as usual, put her back in the command zone. But most of our opponents are going to lose just everything other than their lands. We're going to keep all of our artifacts that aren't tokens. So that's pretty great. Then we just replay Toph, and we keep going as we have been. But we probably have a lot going on for us anyway with all those artifacts that got to remain in play. So yeah, Hour of Revelation is very nice for this deck. So that covers our support sections. We're going to talk now about the supplemental sections that we have, starting with our synergy section. First is Surge Conductor. Surge Conductor is a 3/2 artifact creature robot for 3 that says whenever another non-token artifact we control enters, proliferate. So this is colloquially known as Artifact Fall, or non-token, Artifact Fall. Whenever we have one of our other there's 38 artifacts in this deck, so Surge Conductor is already in play. Any of our other 37 artifacts that are not tokens come in, we're going to get to proliferate with this in play. That can really help us get a lot of counters on things. Any joins up, of course, is synergistic because it doubles the triggers of our legendary creatures. Panharmonicon is synergistic because it doubles the triggers of any artifact or creature entering, any triggered abilities that are triggered by any of our artifact or creatures entering. So pretty great for our landfall triggers with our artifacts, great for our creatures, and so forth. Next is Tanic Steadfast Second. We've already seen Tanic Memorial Ensign in red and green. This is Big Tanic. Big Tanic is important in this deck and is really, really fun. So we remember the Bygone Colossus. We saw this friend earlier. Bygone Colossus is just a 9/9, but we can warp it in for 3, and then at the end step, its warp delayed trigger goes on the stack at the same time as Toph's Metalbending, or rather Earthbending trigger, which means we can resolve Toph's first, Earthbend the Colossus. It will become a 0/0 with 2 counters on it. Then we let the warp delayed trigger resolve. It will exile it, but Earthbend will bring it right back tapped. So we've sort of cheated it into play for 3 mana rather than all 9. Tanic Steadfast Second is 2 and double red for a 3/5 legendary Kavu pilot that gives all of our other creatures haste, and all of our artifacts and red creature cards in our hand have warp for 2 and a red. So this means every artifact in our hand we are able to do the same trick with our commander that we could do with the Bygone Colossus. We can take, let's say, Panharmonicon. It's in our hand, Tanick's in play, and so is Toph. We can either cast Panharmonicon for 4, this is not a super great example because it's only 4, but we can have Tanick warp in Panharmonicon, or rather, Tanick gives Panharmonicon the warp cost of 2 and a red. So we could warp in Panharmonicon, then go to the end step, Earthbend the Panharmonicon, and the warp trigger, delay trigger will exile it, Earthbend will bring it right back tapped, and we get to have our Panharmonicon, and we only spent 3 for it. That's pretty sweet. But imagine being able to do that with something huge, like, well, we've already seen the Bygone Colossus, but let's take a look at something huge, like our Spinavish Saw. That seems pretty good. Or our Platinum Angel, or our Combat Thresher. We can get Combat Thresher can already come in for 3. Angel of the Ruins, there you go. 7 mana card, we get it to come in for 2 and a red thanks to Tanick, because we warp it in. It enters, it exiles 2 artifacts and or enchantments. Then at the end step, we can Earthbend it, and it will come right back in when it gets exiled by the delayed warp trigger, and it will exile 2 artifacts and or enchantments right again. It'll be tapped because it came back thanks to Earthbending, but we'll be able to use it the next turn, and we only spent 2 mana on it. That's what's most important. So Tanick lets us do some pretty sneaky stuff with it, and I really like it for that reason. Plus, it gives all of our creatures haste, and it works on red creature cards. We can do that too. Maybe that's not relevant to us, but we can sure do fun things with it. I'll mention one more thing with this, and it is... Oh no. Let's see. Maelstrom Colossus, that's what I'm thinking of. Maelstrom Colossus is 8 generic mana for a 7/7 that cascades, and that's all it does. And if we Earthbend this, it just comes back as a 7/7 when it dies. It becomes a 2/2, comes back as a 7/7, and does not cascade because cascade is a cast trigger, not an enters the trigger. Tanick lets us warp that in for 2 and a red, which is an alternate casting cost. So we can cast it for 2 and a red. The Maelstrom Colossus will go on the stack, and its cascade ability will trigger. Its cascade ability is not based on what we spent to cast it. It's based on its mana value. So we've just paid 2 and a red to get a 7/7 and cascade for 8. It'll enter, it'll sit there on the battlefield, and then it will go to exile, because that's how warp works. But that means it's now in exile, and we can cast it for its full mana value on a later turn, which means we do get to cascade a second time that way. And if we have some way to put it back in our hand, which we have a few different ways to bounce things, or to take our artifacts that have died and get them out of the graveyard and put it back in our hand, we can do all of this all over again and get some more cascade out of it. Now, a little bit of Magical Christmas Land because we're relying on 2 cards in the 99 to interact that way, but it is worth remembering that this is something we can do, and it's nice to be able to do. So yeah. But I was mentioning a moment ago that Tanick also works not just for artifacts, but for red creature cards. That means, for anyone who's a new player, it means any card that is a creature card, it has creature printed in the type line, that has any red pips in its casting cost. Like Tanick itself, but Tanick can't do that. But it does apply to something like the other Tanick, or if somehow our commander was in our hand. Maybe that's not a great idea to do, but we could get the other Tanick out and warp him out if we wanted to. But we can also do Sentinel Sarah Lions. This is a white and red card, which means it's a red creature card, so we could warp Sarah Lions out if we want. But why would we want to? Well, let's find out about Sarah Lions. 3, a red and a white, gives us a 4/4 legendary human knight with haste. We can warp her out hastily, attack with her, and if she's survived, she'll go to exile, and we can do it again on a later turn, casting her for her regular cost. So it's a possibility that might be worth it. In addition, Sarah Lyon says, as long as an artifact entered the battlefield under our control this turn, creatures you control get +2/+2. That's all of our creatures, just get bigger. It does not say other creatures, so Sarah Lyon's would be a 6/6, assuming we've had another artifact enter. This is not a triggered ability. This is a static ability. This happens as long as we've had another artifact enter under our control this turn. So if we've had an artifact come in before Sarah Lyons does, she's going to come in as a 6/6. If we play an artifact after Sarah Lyons, she'll become a 6/6 after that. But it is not +2/+2 for each artifact we've had enter. It's just checking, did an artifact enter? Great, +2/+2. If another artifact enters, you ask the same question. Well, did an artifact enter? Great, it's just +2/+2. It's just, that's all it is. It's just a yes or a no, not an additional one. Also, Sarah Lyons has Battalion. Whenever she attacks with at least 2 other creatures, Sarah and at least 2 other creatures, whenever they attack, Sarah deals damage equal to the number of artifacts you control to target player. We can't hit other permanents with this, so it's not a removal spell. But we might have 30 artifacts in play. It doesn't even say non-token, so we might have a lot more than 38 artifacts in play. Then Sarah and 2 other things attack, and remember Sarah has haste, so hard to plan for this. We might just kill a player by just attacking with her. So this is a great reason to be able to warp her in with Tanic if we want to. Sarah Lyons is really cool. And so of course, the synergy of this is based on us being able to just zot one of our opponents for an awful lot of damage based on the number of artifacts we have. So that covers our synergy section. Let's talk about our counters. We've seen a lot of these, maybe all of them. Yeah, it looks like we have. So Origin Metalbending, of course, puts a counter on one of our creatures if we choose that mode, and it gains indestructible until end of turn. Throne of Geth can let us sacrifice an artifact to proliferate. Etheric Amplifier can let us pay for and tap to double the number of counters on a permanent we control. Evolution Sage has a landfall trigger. We get to proliferate when land enters under our control. Solar Array gives our artifact spells Sunburst, or it gives one of our artifacts. The next artifact we cast after we've tapped this for mana gets Sunburst. Strength Bobblehead, we can activate to put counters on a creature based on the number of bobbleheads we control. Surge Conductor, when our non-token artifacts enter, we proliferate. Obun has a landfall trigger to just landfall, put a 1/1 counter on a creature. Contagion Engine lets us proliferate twice when we activate it. And Primeval Bounty, of course, whenever we cast a non-creature spell, we get to put 3 1/1 counters on a creature we control. That covers our counters. Let's go to our token generation. Tokens are not that important in this deck, but it's nice to be able to round things out. We're running 25 creatures, which is fine, and a lot of our lands and artifacts can become creatures thanks to Earthbending. But being able to get more creatures out and gum up the board or use them for chump blockers or maybe even win with them can be pretty helpful. So Springheart and Nantuko, of course, can make either 1/1 insect creature tokens or copies of whatever it's bestowed on if, when we have landfall, we pay the 1 and a green for that. Charisma Bobblehead, if we use its second ability, we can make a bunch of 1/1 white soldier creature tokens. Scoot Swarm makes insects, but also makes copies of itself once we have enough land, and we're going to have enough land. Trading Post, we can make a goat. Maybe we can make more goats. Sometimes you want a goat. Chocobo Racetrack, of course, makes chocobos, the 2/2 birds with the weird landfall fire-breathing ability. But if Toph is in play, remember, it does trigger itself, so it comes with a bird. Primeval Bounty makes these beasts whenever we cast a creature spell, and Wormcoil Engine, when it dies, makes 2 halves of itself. 3/3 Phyrexian Worm with Death Touch, and another one with Lifelink. That covers our tokens. Let's talk about the couple of sources of evasion we have in this deck. Not that much. We have a few things that have evasion inherent to them, but these are ways to grant evasion. Agility Bobblehead can make some of our creatures unblockable except by creatures with haste. Earthbender Ascension can grant trample, and Legend of Kyoshi can give all of our lands trample in addition to hexproof when it's on the backside. So just a little bit of evasion. We have a couple of other ways in our land base, but that's what it comes to for our spells. Let's talk now about our 5 cards that let us sacrifice our artifacts. There's not that much to it, but we are able to sacrifice a few things in order to get more benefit out of our Earthbend effects. So of course, Exploration Brood Ship, once it's stationed up to 8 or more charge counters, we can sacrifice a land in addition to paying the costs of a permanent spell in our graveyard to be able to recast that spell from our graveyard. Oswald Fiddlebender lets us pay pay a white and tap and sacrifice an artifact to Birthing Pod up an artifact from our library that costs 1 more than the one we sacrificed. Throne of Geth lets us tap and sack an artifact to proliferate. Trading Post lets us pay 1 and tap and sack an artifact to draw a card, or we can use this to sacrifice creatures to get artifacts back from our graveyard to our hand. And of course, Radiant Lotus lets us tap it and sack any number of artifacts to make 3 times as much mana of one color, 3 times as much mana as the artifacts we sacrificed, all of one color. There you go. Those are our outlets. We have a few spells, actually quite a few spells, that will protect us. One that we haven't seen. Origin of Metalbending can give one of our creatures a 1/1 counter and indestructible until end of turn. 2 we haven't seen, actually. Swiftfoot Boots I've put in here because we want to protect Toph. We don't have a lot of things that are doing that, other than, some of these other cards that are in this section. Swiftfoot Boots is an artifact. It is an equipment, however, that equips for 1 and costs 2, and it gives the equipped creature hexproof and haste. We're not so interested in the haste, although it's helpful, as we are in the hexproof. Now, I do want to make mention that this is an equipment. So that means if we earthbend this equipment, it will become a 0/0 creature with 2 counters on it. So it's a 2/2 creature. It does have an equip ability that will not work. Because if an effect tries to attach a creature to another creature, it fails to do so. So Swiftfoot Boots, we can play it for 2 and then equip it on something, or we can turn it into a creature by earthbending it, and it doesn't get to be an equipment anymore until it's no longer a creature. If it is currently attached, I guess, if we were to, equip this to Toph, let's say, and then at the end step have Toph earthbend it, it will just fall off of her and become a creature now. So we can't do both things. If you're a player that's familiar with Reconfigure, this does not work like that. Reconfigure is its own special thing. So yeah, Swiftfoot Boots, I didn't put other equipment in this deck for that reason. But it's really cheap as a way for us to protect Toph, and much less expensive than a pair of Lightning Greaves. So yeah, the Swifties are what we're going with. Endurance Bobblehead can make X target creatures get +1/+0 and indestructible until end of turn. That protects them. Low Shield prevents combat damage dealt to attacking artifact creatures we control. I'll cover the ones we've seen already. Bronze Guardian gives all of our other artifacts Ward 2, and Platinum Angel makes it so we can't lose the game and our opponents can't win the game. But we also have, and this is really just kind of a mean card in this deck, the Stasis Coffin. Very cheap because it doesn't do a lot in most other decks, but it really helps us. For 3 generic mana, we get a legendary artifact that says, pay 2, tap, and exile the Stasis Coffin. You gain protection from everything until your next turn. So if we earthbend this, we pay 2, tap, exile it, and it returns to the battlefield tapped under our control, and we still get its effect. So we can do this every turn if we want to. Every one of our turns. It doesn't protect us all the time because it only works until our next turn. So on our next turn, we'd have to use it, and then maybe, or in response to that, someone could do something. Throughout the entirety of our turn, unless we have a different way to earthbend it, we gotta wait till the end step with our commander to earthbend it and then activate it. So yeah, it doesn't help protect us all the time, but it protects us for quite a while. Now, but what does protection from everything mean? Protection from everything means this: as a player, we cannot be damaged by anything. We can't take damage. We can still lose life, but we can't be targeted by anything. So if a player has an ability that says target player loses 3 life, well, they can't target us, so we can't lose that life. If it says each player loses 3 life, we will lose the life because we are protected from damage, but not loss of life. Damage causes loss of life. And since that doesn't target, it can still affect us. The only other thing protection does is it stops us from being enchanted. So normally protection covers the acronym DEBT, D-E-B-T. Damage, equipping and enchanting, blocking, and targeting. Obviously, we can't be blocked because we are a player, but we can be targeted, we can be enchanted, and we can be damaged. But while we have protection from everything, none of those things can happen to us. I do want to make mention, for anyone who hasn't seen this kind of interaction before, it says you gain protection from everything until your next turn. It does not say permanents you control, or spells you control, or your graveyard. Cards in your graveyard. The only thing that has protection is the player, us. All of our stuff does not have that protection. But still, Stasis Coffin can really protect us pretty well, and it can save our bacon. And it's just sort of a unique interaction with Earthbending. So I think it's worth running. That covers our protection section. We have one more section, which is about Recursion, which we've seen all these cards. Exploration Brood Ship, once we've stationed it up to 8 charge counters, lets us sacrifice a land in order to cast a permanent spell from our graveyard. Toph lets us, even though we're not likely to get it to happen, lets us discard a card when she enters to return an instant or sorcery from our graveyard to our hand. It's 7 options in our deck. We might be able to do it. It's possible. And then Trading Post, of course. If we pay 1, tap, and sack a creature, we can bring an artifact from our graveyard back to our hand, which is pretty great. So that covers our Recursion section. We have one more section to talk about, and it is our lands. We are running 20 basic lands, because that's where I wanted us to be for this deck. You could certainly build this with a lot more typed duels, or just dual lands in general. I build my decks on a specific budget and a specific power level, as you can see. So this is what we're looking at, and this is a pretty good mix for our color balance in this deck. We might even want to run fewer mountains if we want to really match the balance, but at this point, our commander only costs 4 mana and is all 3 of these colors. I want to make sure that I'm hitting all of my colors by turn 4, so this is the balance that I did for my 20 basic lands. We are also running all three of the bounce lands. If you haven't seen a bounce land before, here's how they work. Bounce lands enter tapped, and when they do, we have to return a land we control to its owner's hand. We have to bounce a land. That means if it's the first land we play, it's the only land we have in play, so we have to return it to our hand, so not ideal. But if we have, let's say, a basic in play, we could tap that basic first, use its mana, or just float its mana, then play the Boros Garrison and bounce that tapped land to our hand. And even though this is tapped, we didn't miss out on the mana we had from the basic that turn. The reason we go through all this rigmarole is bounce lands tap for 2 mana. This isn't tap for a red or white, it's tap for a red and a white. It's 2 mana. So this is not just a great way for us to get more landfall triggers, because we're playing a land, then we're playing a bounce land, bouncing the first one, and next turn we're getting to play that land again. But it also means we're definitely hitting our land drop, and we're not behind on mana, because even though we now only have 2 lands in play, one of them makes 3 mana, so we're turn 3, we've got 3 lands, or we've got 3 mana, or over the course of 3 turns, we've still got 3 mana available to us. The only difference between these lands is the colors of mana they make. Boros Garrison makes Boros mana, red and white. Gruul Turf makes Gruul mana, red and green. And Selesnya Sanctuary makes Selesnya mana, green and white. So these are pretty sweet in this deck, especially because these have us bounce lands. With our commander out, all of our non-token artifacts are lands. So if we wanted to bounce the Spine of Ish-Sah, if we wanted to bounce Maelstrom Colossus so that we can recast it and recascade, bounce lands let us do that. Pretty nice interaction. We're running all 3 check lands as well. Check lands come in tapped unless we control one of the 2, a land with a basic type of the colors that it is. So Clifftop Retreat, for example, comes in tapped unless we control a mountain or plains. And it taps for red or white. So maybe this comes in as a tap land that makes red or white, but if we have any of our plains or any of our mountains in play, it will come in untapped. So it's an untapped dual. It's pretty good. It does not mean, it specifically calls out those types. So it has to say the type in its type line. Gruul Turf does not let Clifftop Retreat come in untapped because it is just a land. Even though it makes red mana, it is not a mountain. So look for the word mountain or the word plains in your land. But we run these check lands, and they work similarly to what we saw here. They're all 2 different colors, and they care about the basic types that match those colors. So Sunpetal Grove makes green and white, and it's looking for forests and plains to come in untapped. If you wanted to upgrade your check lands, you could play some slow lands. Slow lands are maybe a little bit more consistent because they come in untapped as long as you have 2 or more other lands in play. So they're going to come in tapped early on, but probably so will the check lands. Even though they have the possibility of coming in untapped even as early as your second drop. Or you could side grade into the Tango lands. Tango lands, much like the slow lands, require you to have 2 lands in play already, but Tango lands require them to be basic. Slow lands just care that you have lands in play. The reason Tango lands are good is because they also have basic types themselves. So for example, Canopy Vista is a Sunpetal Grove in the sense that it taps for green or white, but it also has the types plains and forest. So if you had a Sunpetal Grove, or if you had a Canopy Vista in play, Sunpetal Grove would come in untapped because Canopy Vista is a forest and a plains. So just thoughts on side grading there. We're running 6 fixing lands. Of course we're running Command Tower because we have at least 2 colors in our commander's color identity. This is Arcane Signet as a land, if you want to think of it that way. This is a land that comes in untapped, and it taps for 1 mana of any color in our commander's color identity. So it's an untapped tri-land in this deck. It makes white, it makes red, it makes green. Obviously we're going to run it. We're also running Exotic Orchard. I like to run this in my decks that have at least 3 colors. This is an untapped land that taps for 1 mana of any color that a land an opponent controls could produce. So if all of our opponents have lands that make only blue and black, well, Exotic Orchard can tap for blue or black, which doesn't help us for anything other than our generic mana costs. But it's pretty likely that if we've got 3 colors, among our opponents, there's going to be lands that tap for at least 2 of our colors. So Exotic Orchard is an untapped dual land in that case. Pretty nice. Might even be a tri-land. Next is Temple of the False God. I know not everyone likes this card, but I think it's perfect for the uses and power level of my decks. This is a soul land. It's like Soul Ring. It taps for 2 generic mana, or 2 colorless mana rather, but it only is able to be activated if we control 4 lands besides it. So 5 lands including itself or more. So we can't tap it for any mana early on in the game, but we have to remember, with our commander in play, all of our non-token artifacts are lands. So even if we play Temple of the False God as our 3rd actual land, if our commander's in play and we have a bunch of manaliths, then we have 5 or more lands. And we can then tap this for double colorless. So pretty sweet. We're also running 3 soft fetches. Cabaret Courtyard is the first one. It comes in and it automatically sacrifices itself. So we're not going to be able to get a chance to Earthbend this real quick, probably. I guess if we have Toph, Hot-Headed Teacher in play, and we play the Cabaret Courtyard, and its enters trigger goes on the stack, and we cast an instant, which triggers Toph, which lets us Earthbend the Cabaret Courtyard, which would mean it sacrifices itself, and then it comes back and immediately sacrifices itself again. But in all likelihood, what's going to happen with the Courtyard is it enters, it sacrifices itself, and then we get to Rampant Growth for a mountain, a forest, or a plains. All basic, of course. We put that on the battlefield tapped, we shuffle, and we gain a life. Just a little nice bonus here. This is just a automatic sacrifice version of Evolving Wilds, or fetch lands like that, because we don't need to hold up and try and get a shuffle. We're not really looking for that in this deck. So we might as well run something that automatically does its job and gains us a little bit of life in the process. What's also nice is we have ways to get lands out of our graveyard, so we could do this again if we wanted to. We're also running Sheltering Landscape. which is an untapped land that taps for colorless, or we can tap it and do what we just saw for Cabaret Courtyard, except for gaining the life. Search for a basic mountain, forest, or plains, put it on the battlefield tapped, and shuffle. So this is Evolving Wilds for our 3 types in our deck, except that it also taps for colorless mana. And if we want, maybe later in the game, we can pay a red, a green, and a white and discard this to draw a card because it has cycling. So this is good for us early game, it's good for us mid game, and it's good for us late game. Finally, we have Myriad Landscape. Myriad Landscape is a land that comes in tapped, and it taps for colorless, but we can also pay 2, tap, and sacrifice it to search our library for up to 2 basic land cards that share a land type. So in this deck, 2 plains, 2 mountains, or 2 forests. Then we put them on the battlefield tapped and shuffle. So it's sort of like a double rampant growth for basics that are the same type. Now, those come in tapped, this comes in tapped, and we do have to pay 2, tap, and sack this to make this all happen. But even with all of those steps, this is us making 1 land drop to get 2 lands into play, which is also 2 more land drops. So not only is that a bunch of landfall triggers, it's also ramp built into a land, even if it's very slow ramp. So Myriad Landscape, totally worth running. Next, we are running the only tri-land we can run, I guess. Jungle Shrine comes in tapped, and it taps for all 3 of our colors. So it's like a tapped command tower for us. That's pretty okay. We could have run Path of Ancestry with this as well, but not that many other cards that really give us the scry help that we would want, so just a Jungle Shrine is enough. If you wanted to upgrade this, you could upgrade to the Jetmir's Garden Triome, and it would be exactly the same card, except it would have types here. It'd be a Forest, Mountain, Plains, and it would also have cycling for 3 generic, so pretty good option if you want to do that. Last of all, we're running these 5 utility lands. The first is Abandoned Air Temple. It enters tapped unless we control a basic land, and since we have 20 basics in our library, it's pretty likely to come in untapped. It taps for white, but we can also pay 3 and a white and tap it to put a 1/1 counter on each creature we control. That's a lot of 1/1 counters. It works for anything that's a creature, even if that thing is also, or even if that creature is only a creature because we Earthbent it. So worth looking at. Now that is tapping 5 lands essentially. 3 and a white probably may not be land, but it might be, plus this one. But that's, in all likelihood, gonna be at least 5 counters. Pretty good. Similarly, we're running Gavany Township. This is an older version of a similar idea. Now this does not have a chance of coming in tapped, but it only taps for colorless mana. And rather than paying 3 and a white, we have to pay 2, a green and a white, and tap to put a 1/1 counter on each creature we control. So not quite as good as the Abandoned Air Temple, and also not as thematic, of course, but no chance of coming in tapped either, so not bad. We're running Bossing Say. Bossing Say enters tapped unless we control a basic land, much the same as the Abandoned Air Temple. It taps for green, or we can pay 2 and a green and tap it to Earthbend 2, but only as a sorcery. So this is our 5th source of Earthbending in the deck. We've got 3 ways to Earthbend beyond our commander, and Bossing Say, so that's 5. A really great way to get some extra Earthbending out. Even if it taps, 4 of our lands, we can go ahead and get some things Earthbent right away. Pretty good. We're also running Demolition Field, which I mentioned earlier. Demolition Field comes in untapped, taps for colorless, but we can also pay 2, tap, and sack it to destroy a non-basic land an opponent controls. Again, not trying to do land denial, just to deal with non-basics that may be helping our opponent too much or getting in the way of our own game plan. Once we do that, that land's controller gets to search for a basic, put it on the battlefield untapped, and then shuffle. And so do we. So neither of us are down a land, unless, of course, either of us has run out of basics in our library, but we've gotten rid of something that was problematic for us, and that's why we run just the one of for this. Finally, we've got Kessig Wolfrun. This is an untapped land that taps for colorless, but we can also pay X, a red and a green, so a red, a green, and any amount we want, including 0, and tap it, and target creature gets +X+O and gains trample until end of turn. So if X is 0, it's just target creature gains trample until end of turn. but we can also give them a big power bonus. This is not only at sorcery speed. We can do this after blocks, whether or not our creature has been blocked. We can use it to pump up our creature. We can use it just to gain trample for this little bit of evasion. Kessig Wolfrun is great for us, and really helpful in this deck where even though we can get a lot of things going off and get a lot of value out of our creatures and out of our artifacts especially, sometimes we just need to push damage. And so I thought Kessig Wolfrun was a little bit better for us than something like a Rogue's Passage. So that's what we went with. And that sums it up. Again, I'm releasing new Avatar Commander decks every Thursday through mid-January when Lorwyn Eclipsed drops. So let me know in the comments if you'd like to see a specific commander or style of deck. Thanks for watching, everyone. Make sure to like and subscribe, and remember, magic is fun. You should play more Magic.